At SolarWinds, we developed our Secure by Design initiative to be the gold-plated standard for cybersecurity. Secure by Design means developing security into our products and our development lifecycle. It's headlined by our next-generation build system, a new way to develop secure software. This is about becoming a leader in enterprise software security. At SolarWinds, we developed our Secure by Design initiative to be the gold-plated standard for cybersecurity. Secure by Design means developing security into our products and our development lifecycle. It's headlined by our next-generation build system, a new way to develop secure software. This is about becoming a leader in enterprise software security. At SolarWinds, we developed our Secure by Design initiative to be the gold-plated standard for cybersecurity. Secure by Design means developing security into our products and our development lifecycle. It's headlined by our next-generation build system, a new way to develop secure software. This is about becoming a leader in enterprise software security. At SolarWinds, we developed our Secure by Design initiative to be the gold-plated standard for cybersecurity. Secure by Design means developing security into our products and our development lifecycle. It's headlined by our next-generation build system, a new way to develop secure software. This is about becoming a leader in enterprise software security. At SolarWinds, we developed our Secure by Design initiative to be the gold-plated standard for cybersecurity. Secure by Design means developing security into our products and our development lifecycle. It's headlined by our next-generation build system, a new way to develop secure software. This is about becoming a leader in enterprise software security. At SolarWinds, we developed our Secure by Design initiative to be the gold-plated standard for cybersecurity. Secure by Design means developing security into our products and our development lifecycle. It's headlined by our next-generation build system, a new way to develop secure software. This is about becoming a leader in enterprise software security.
Welcome to the Intelligent Security Summit, brought to you by VentureBeat. We're excited to have attendees joining from across the world, and thousands more of you tuning in to the VentureBeat live stream channels. Now, of course, this event couldn't exist without our wonderful sponsors. We would like to thank all of our Intelligent Security Summit sponsors, SolarWinds and Abnormal Security. Thank you so much for supporting this event. And please make sure to go to our sponsor pages. Click through via the logos, get access to even more great content, white papers, and reports. Now, of course, we've had an entire crack squad of people working for hundreds of people hours on the official event hashtag. And it is, of course, hashtag VBTransform. It is our standard hashtag every single time. You will one day get sick and tired of me making that joke. But please join the conversation. Use that hashtag VBTransform, everywhere that you can use a hashtag, especially on Twitter, because you'll see our live Twitter feed with the hashtag VBTransform. We'll be featuring your tweets. So do go ahead and use that as much as you humanly can. Of course, if you want to meet other Intelligent Security Summit attendees, make sure you click on the network navigation above. Now, you can search through the full attendee list to chat with your other participants. Of course, today we're going to delve into the hot topic that is security. We have an amazing program with over 12 incredible speakers and moderators, and some just awesome content coming up for you today. And this event, of course, is interactive. You can make comments to the speakers, and you can answer some intriguing poll questions through the chat feature in each session. So we're excited to kick off the Intelligent Security Summit today by welcoming Tom Gillis, Senior Vice President and General Manager at VMware, who will be discussing the topic, optimizing security strategies during an acute talent shortage.
Hey everyone, this is Tom Gillis. I'm the General Manager for Networking and Advanced Security at VMware. I'm going to talk about the role that technology can play in helping augment the critical talent in our security organizations. So many of us have already seen the huge impact that artificial intelligence has had on everything from aviation to agriculture to manufacturing. It's fundamentally changing and reshaping industries. But as good as the computer intelligence is, there's a truism that I learned back in engineering school in the 80s when I was doing programming. And my professor used to call it GIGO. And GIGO stands for garbage in, garbage out. And what this means is that no matter how good your artificial intelligence or your algorithms, if you're not giving it the proper data, you're going to get a questionable result. And so this is very much true in the cyber industry. Now, if we blur our eyes and think about how security has evolved over the past few decades, security has really lived in two places. It's lived at the perimeter and at the endpoint. So many customers will say, I've got a next generation firewall and I've got like an EDR solution, so then I must be good, right? And yet, despite widespread deployment of these systems, what we see happening in the industry is that the trend is that attackers' goal is to enter your network and avoid detection. In fact, if we look at the Log4j fiasco, that was more than 9 months ago. And yet, what was the super high profile breach? What was the movie script that was stolen? Generally, there wasn't one, or one that we know of. And so what we conclude from this is that the goal of attackers is to get in and stay in, sometimes for 9 months. So think about this in real world terms. Imagine if someone broke into your house and stole your tax return. Like, what an affront, what a violation, what a breach of your personal sovereignty. Now imagine someone broke into your house and stayed for 9 months, going room to room, listening to you, reading to your kids, right? It's an untenable proposition in the real world, but in cyber, this is what we're up against. And this is why we like to make the assertion that lateral security and the ability to spot that lateral movement, this is the most important piece in your security tool chain. So let's think a little bit about how we can enforce lateral security. So most people, when they think about lateral security, they think about segmentation. So to illustrate the power of segmentation in your security arsenal, I'm going to ask everyone on this call to momentarily pretend that you're a SOC analyst. Let's look at this traffic pattern and see if you can identify an anomaly. Now, I'm from Boston, and so I look at that and say, nope, that's how we drive. But for most people, it's pretty obvious a guy driving around the tree is taking a path that should not exist. This is the problem that microsegmentation solves. So microsegmentation says, you know what, I'm going to turn off the obviously bad pathways and prevent any lateral movement through those pathways. So the good news is we've been doing this for almost a decade now. So I can say with confidence that we can make microsegmentation work and work at scale. We've done this for thousands and thousands of the largest companies in the world. That's the good news. The bad news is attackers are assuming you have microsegmentation in place. And so what we've seen happening in the industry is a significant rise in what the security researchers call living off the land attacks, which means attackers will take a stolen credential or compromise a protocol to move through legitimate application pathways. And this requires a really fresh look at how we can stop the lateral movement through legitimate application pathways. The number one pathway that we see attackers using is a protocol called RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol. Now, this is a protocol that your sysadmins are using to update your server, so you're not going to block that at the network level. What we need is a distributed system that can look at every RDP connection and figure out, is this friend or is this foe? So it takes an end-to-end view where we start by looking at the behavior of the endpoint, the posture of the device, the network that's being traversed, and then the application not as a monolith, but we need to look at the individual piece parts of the application to identify this lateral movement. If you look at the application as a monolith, or you look at the application just at the perimeter, say at the web server, you're missing all of this east-west traffic. And again, a fundamental principle of security is you can't stop what you can't see. So having that visibility is really, really essential. Now, I'll argue that this is something that the SIM vendors have been talking about for 2 decades. And the challenge that a SIM has, I'm very familiar with these systems, is that they suffer from what I call the car alarm problem. So if you're walking down the street and you hear a car alarm, what do? You keep walking down the street, right? Maybe you yell, hey, turn that thing off. But generally, car alarms suffer from really, really high false positive rates. And generally, what I find is that most customers find their SIM systems do too. And it's not that the analytics in a SIM are bad. It's that they are relying on sample data. And sample data is only letting them see part of the picture. Let's dig into this and think about that east-west lateral movement of an attacker. If they're moving machine to machine in a virtualized world, that could be 3 separate VMs that are running in the same physical host. So that traffic will never touch a network switch. So if you're relying on a network tap to do the east-west analytics, you're going to be missing more than half the picture. In fact, if you look at what's happening in the industry, Intel, AMD, and VMware are working to build systems with very, very high density CPUs. So we can put more than 128 cores into a single chassis. In fact, the latest version of hardware can put 256 cores into a single chassis. So with vSphere 7, we ran benchmarks where we've got 150 VMs that run in a single box with virtually no performance degradation. So think about that for a minute. You've got 150 VMs that are talking to each other, and that traffic never touches a network switch. So if you're relying on tools like NetFlow or network tapping to be able to do the east-west traffic analysis, you're missing the vast majority of that east-west traffic. And this is the power of the virtualization layer. So the hypervisor sees every single packet. Not only does it see every single packet, it sees every process that initiated those packets. So it's a very, very powerful platform that allows us to peer deeply into the conversation and not rely on sample data. Because if you're simply relying on sample data, you may not be seeing the full picture. And this is a sort of simple example. Something that might look harmless. Hey, server A is talking to server B using an RDP connection. That good? That bad? Well, that's what NetFlow tells you. So you need to go deeper and to understand what did they actually talk about. Now, once you can actually see what's happening at the network layer, and when you can see what's happening at the host layer, if you can combine those together, this is what the industry is calling XDR, or extended detection and remediation. And it's a very, very powerful concept. But again, it has to be done not with sample data. You can't be taking NetFlow logs and syslog and crunching them all together, because that's what a SIM is for 2 decades, and it doesn't work that well. Let's imagine a scenario where we've got 2 servers, an Apache server and an app server and a finance application. If we're running inside the host, we pretty much know what Apache looks like. We know what processes to expect when Apache's running. Let's imagine that one of those Apache servers launches a new process, and we don't see it anywhere else in your fleet of Apache servers, and we don't see it anywhere in our global inventory of Apache. It doesn't mean that is bad. In this example, I'm calling it process X, which is also kind of suspicious, right? Process X. But that means suspicious. It's suspect. And so with the VMware XDR solution, we take our awareness of the endpoint that we get with Carbon Black, and we correlate that with what we see on the network. So if there's a process that initiates a connection, and it's a known good process, we say, we recognize this, it's part of Apache, it's connected to a process that we recognize, and the payload looks normal, we'll allow that transaction. But if we see that process X, and it's making a connection that looks suspicious, and it's asking for, 250 million credit card numbers, is that a connection you want to allow? The answer is generally no. And so in order to really make XDR work, you really need to have insight into every single process and every single packet that's traversing the wire. Virtualization makes all of this possible. Now, one of the challenges you have is that if you're looking at every process and every packet for your east-west traffic, the amount of data that we have to process is enormous. It is, terabytes of data a day. And I'll argue that the latest security algorithms that we're running, it wasn't feasible to run these in the cloud even 4 or 5 years ago. So you've often probably heard the cliche that security is a big data problem. Well, it really, really is. And as big data tools and technology advance, it allows us to look at things like every single packet and every single process on your east-west traffic and figure out, is that RDP connection real or is that ransomware? So as we go through and look at this, let's think about the role that machine learning can play as we're analyzing this ever-growing heap of data, trying to identify the lateral movement of attackers. It's fundamentally, I believe, fundamentally important that you will always have a role for computer-driven machine learning. You're also going to have supervised machine learning where humans are in the loop. And I'll explain why. The first thing to understand is that when you're looking at these huge reams of data, you're going to find all kinds of anomalies. And just because something is an anomaly doesn't mean that it's bad. This is why supervised learning is so important. So here's an example. Imagine this cluster, which just would say, I see a whole bunch of activity that looks kind of similar. And then I see this one random thing off to the side that looks different. Pretty easy to identify the anomaly, right? But if you actually apply human intelligence, you'd say, this is an outlier, but it doesn't mean that it's bad, right? And so with supervised learning, you can say, hey, these are the three things that are bad. And you can teach the machine, this is a cluster of known bad. And just simply because something is anomalous doesn't mean it's bad. Okay, so that's the first thing that we do is we say, let's use humans to help the machines. The machines are going to process the trillions of events, but the humans will be able to look at those patterns and be able to identify friend from foe. Now, the second thing that we learn is that the world is complex. And so anomalies happen in the strangest and most unusual way. I think that's why we call them anomalies, because they're anomalous. And so simply using a linear classifier of saying, black and white, this is good and this is bad, that's not sufficient. So if we go back to that example we talked about earlier, where you create a cluster and say, this is all patterns that I know to be bad, and then these patterns are known to be good, even if it has that outlier anomaly. Well, that's generally not going to be a linear sample. So if you think about adding more data to this picture, when you're using supervised as well as unsupervised machine learning, you can create clusters where you can say, aha, this isn't a simple case of curve fitting, but I can draw a pattern that would distinguish the bad behavior from the good behavior. And this becomes an incredibly powerful technique because you have attackers that are trying to mess this up. They are deliberately trying to make their behavior look like legitimate application behavior. In fact, one of the things we see is that the rate of movement of an attacker has slowed dramatically. So oftentimes an attacker will land on a server and then they'll stay put for 5, 6, 7 days before they make their next move, which means that the amount of events that you have to process to find that one, malicious event, it's at a very, very, very low signal to noise ratio, right? You might have to process thousands of events to find the one bad one. And so having humans that can look at this low signal to noise and say, look, these are the characteristics of a known attack. This is a critical role in creating an effective solution overall. Now, the third truism that we find over and over again, and I found this not just at VMware, but going back to my first days in using machine learning, which was at Ironport Systems, we were a spam filter vendor. And if you remember the days of spam being a problem, what spammers would do is they would just send huge, huge volumes of mail. We were fortunate at Ironport in that we had some of the largest telco customers in the world that were our customers. And so we were able to harvest telemetry from these very, very large telcos where we think we had a meaningful sample of the entire world's email traffic. And so it gave us this huge data set to work with so that we could train our algorithms using both supervised and unsupervised machine learning. And if these systems said it's bad, it was bad. If this system said it's legitimate mail, it was legitimate mail. So we were so accurate that you didn't even need a quarantine to be able to do this. And the main reason wasn't that our algorithms were better than anyone else's. It was the access to data we had with huge amounts of service provider volume to feed our machine learning models. And so this graph shows a number of heuristics that were developed that were competing algorithms, and they were used to classify and recognize words. And so what we found was that it really didn't matter so much about which model you chose. What mattered the most was the amount of data that you fed into this to allow the machine to be able to understand language. And so the size and the quality of your data is really, really essential. And so as you think about security solutions, you want to be looking for security solutions that, for example, are going to be able to see all of that east-west traffic. You need to be able to peer into the virtualization layer. You need to be able to understand what's happening at the process level and the packet level. And then you can feed your security algorithms to figure out, is this something a system administrator would actually do, or does this look like ransomware? So in order to achieve this data collection, we really need a different architecture. We need to think differently about how a data center is built. So for as long as I've been doing security, security has always come in a box. And when I say this, I mean an appliance. So if you look at the picture of these devices, these are hardware firewalls, hardware IPS, a hardware load balancer, a web app firewall. Imagine if we could take these devices. One of the challenges with these hardware devices is that because they live in a box, you have to put them at the edge. You have to put them at the perimeter. So they're not going to see all of that east-west traffic. They're not going to see every single hop along the way. They're only going to see what's coming in and what's going out. And that is far too small a sample to make intelligent decisions, even if you use supervised machine learning. So imagine we could take these traditional security services, define them in software, and break them literally into 10,000 pieces. So 10,000 little miniature security stacks, each one of which is applied to a different piece of the application. So your web server gets its own security stack, your database gets its own security stack, and they're different. This allows you to think differently about the guts of your data center. All of a sudden, your data center is now just racks and racks of x86 servers, which, by the way, looks an awful lot like the hyperscale cloud. The hyperscale providers are not using proprietary hardware firewalls, proprietary hardware load balancers. They're using scale-out infrastructure software that runs on racks and racks of x86. Now, if we drill down into any one node of this x86, we can see that we have an individual server that could be a web server, it could be a database, it could be an Active Directory server, or it could be a high-performance firewall, or it could be a load balancer. So this creates a level of operational flexibility and simplicity, allows you to reconfigure the entire data center on demand as required. When you have this software-based architecture, it allows you to see each of the services that are making up this application. So the web server talking to the app server talking to the database. You are in the data path, which allows you to record which process made that connection and look at all those packets on the wire. This is what gives us that very, very high fidelity view that allows us to be able to say with confidence that we can stop the east-west movement of an attacker and identify the lateral movement of an attacker far more effectively than you can with any traditional security tool like a hardware firewall or a hardware load balancer. Combining this distributed software architecture with both supervised and unsupervised machine learning and a data platform that's powerful enough to ingest all of this telemetry, what we have is a very, very strong security solution that can adhere to the principles of zero trust, assume that the attackers have already gotten into your network, but we can identify the lateral movement and stop them in their tracks before they can do significant harm. Thank you for listening.
Thanks go to Tom for such a great presentation. Now remember to click on the pop-up to access the next session, Rebuilding Cybersecurity Threat Detection and Response, which will begin shortly. And don't forget to join our speakers in the live Q&A roundtable session at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time. Up next is a great conversation with Jeff Bollinger, Director, Incident Response and Detection Engineering at LinkedIn, and our very own Ashley Hollowell of VentureBeat, who will be sharing why humans are a critical part of threat detection and security operations, the role machine learning does or doesn't play, and how increasing the scale and improvement in the timing of threat detection and incident response will improve security itself. And remember, you can make comments to the speakers and answer polls through the chat feature in the session.
Hi, I'm Ashley Hollowell, staff writer and senior copy editor at VentureBeat. Welcome to the Intelligent Security Summit. Our session, Rebuilding Cybersecurity Threat Detection and Response. I'm excited to speak today with Jeff Bollinger of LinkedIn. Jeff, why don't you tell us a bit about your background and what you do at LinkedIn?
Thanks, Ashley. I'm a director of incident response and detection engineering at LinkedIn. And my team is responsible for protecting the corporate network, LinkedIn employees, and everything that supports the LinkedIn.com platform.
Thank you. So let's dive right into what we're sharing with our audience today. What led LinkedIn to rebuild its security operations platform?
Yeah, so LinkedIn has gone through a tremendous amount of growth over the past several years. And in order for us to scale to meet the challenge to secure that growth, we had to actually expand our platform. And so that was one of the key features there was, reaching 875 million members, a large global workforce, people working remotely. We definitely, at the point, we had the technology foundations in place, but we needed to expand our operations to be able to scale to the company and also get a lot more efficient with our operations.
So what were some of the success criteria for LinkedIn's rebuilding plan?
Yeah, so looking back on what we had before in our previous iteration and kind of our foundational technologies, the criteria were really a couple of pieces. One, we wanted to improve our detection time, how quickly we could respond to things. The other one was we wanted to have a broader view of our network. We wanted to have a much higher confidence in the visibility that we had or the observability of our network. And that was essentially the two key pieces that we had there. And of course, we wanted to detect faster, we wanted to see more things, and we also wanted to respond faster. So those were really what we set out. We had some guiding principles in place, the kind of, things that we did want to do, things that we didn't want to focus on. But really, that was what we felt like would move the needle the most for us. And so as a result, when we looked back after we call the project done, although it's never really done, but when we call the rebuilding component done, we saw that we had effectively, and it's kind of a ridiculous number, but added 900% visibility to what we had before. So we thought we had enough to look at before. We ended up adding 8 additional sources, data sources, which made a huge impact to our operations. So that really expanded our visibility broadly across the network such that we could detect issues happening at various phases of the attack chains, but also we could focus on areas that we didn't have telemetry from in the past, which meant that they weren't getting the appropriate monitoring. So now we have exactly what we need. We've got the full stack in there. We've got every component that's in there, and I think that was one of the big pieces from the visibility perspective. That also allowed us to start being more creative with how we built detections because now we had additional data and data sources. So that was a big one. We also were able to reduce our investigation times by 50%. And after we did the number crunching on this, and that was a significant number for us, and one I'm probably the most proud of because it is the most realistic, and also shows something pretty viable, which is that it took us a long time before to dig through data, put context together, make connections, right, make inferences, and that kind of thing. By gathering all that data in a pipeline, putting it all together and giving it to the team in a more digestible package, that allowed us to be able to, again, back to the human element, rely on their focus of adding context and interpretation, but also saving them lots of time so that we didn't have to spend a lot of time working on additional gathering of information. So that increased our time by 50%. What did we do with that time? We developed additional capabilities. And that was exactly the plan all along, was to effectively, we knew it would be a success when we freed up enough time from our analysts that they would have time to build additional capabilities, improve our skills, get faster at response, that kind of thing. And really what it led to was we would go from, taking a couple of days at times to get all the information from an incident or investigation sorted to within a couple of hours. So now that we can gather data that much quicker, we can put things together, add context quickly. I think that reduction in time from taking a couple of days to deal with an incident to getting it done before your shift is over, I think was a key piece for us. And that was one of the key success criteria, seeing that at the end, we were able to reduce our investigation time by about half, which was great.
Thank you. So why does LinkedIn believe humans are a critical part of threat detection and security operations, Jeff?
Yes, so humans are an absolutely critical component here. So we've, in the last 25 years or so, we've come a long way in the detection world, being able to find things faster, better detection engineering programs have come out, incident response technologies, right? All these things have gotten really, really good over the past several years, but we still haven't gotten to the point where software can contextualize and do analysis of data, right? And I think that's one of the things that's key for us is that people can create and interpret context a lot better than software. And so a couple of examples might be, temporary things, temporal events, past undocumented events, interpersonal knowledge or relationships that people may have together. All those things could have an impact on how someone's going to respond to a particular alert or before classifying it as an incident. And so from our perspective, focusing on people, investing in people, and also building pipelines to minimize the toil that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis has allowed us to actually make the job more fulfilling, but also give us better results, higher efficiency. And while we trust what we're getting from our software and from our analysis, we definitely want to make sure that before we make a final decision or conviction against a particular issue, that we have a person reviewing it, just to be sure that there wasn't some contextual artifact that wasn't picked up by software.
That makes sense. And what does LinkedIn mean by saying they have a software-defined SOC?
Sure. Yeah, our software-defined SOC is something that we were kind of playing with the term. It really kind of comes from the old idea of a SOC-less model, where effectively we've built out multiple pipelines and continuous integration and continuous deployment delivery systems. And what that really means is that rather than having a lot of manual labor, people constantly chasing down issues, trying to find out why data is no longer flowing, and building detections in an ad hoc basis, we've effectively tried to automate as much as possible and do a lot of that pipelining, detection building, and all that inside of a software model itself. And so for us, the idea here is that rather than trying to have 30 people looking at screens all day, looking for pieces of indication of compromise or whatever else, we can do a lot of that upfront by gathering context with software, and by also ensuring that our pipelines are really well really managed. So, for example, we have a lot of data flowing in from syslog, right, from all over the network. That syslog data represents a huge portion of the amount of data that we're actually consuming on a regular basis. We don't want people to spend their time all day working on why isn't syslog flowing or why aren't we actually getting that data. We want people spending their time on actually analyzing it and looking for problems or threats and finding bad actors. So for us, that's kind of one of the key pieces there is really building an effective system where we can minimize a lot of the operational overhead and focus more on the actual analysis itself. And kind of going back to your last question about people, that's really kind of what connects it all together here is that we have built out a lot of automation and software components to get data in front of our people. But at the end of the day, we're still depending upon them to actually make a call on whether something was malicious or not.
Thank you. And speaking of automation, how can automation be leveraged to reduce toil?
Yeah, so anytime that someone has to move data around, I would consider that toil. And there's a lot of toil in the job, right? Moving things around, doing analysis by hand, that sort of thing. A lot of that does take a lot of people's time away. And when you think about the day-to-day life of an incident responder or a detection engineer, they're coming in, they're looking at alerts, they're developing new detections, and they're taking actions based on what they found. And it's really their judgment call based on a series of evidence or indications that they're looking at to make that decision whether or not to go on with the next steps to respond. As in, do I seize this system that we saw unusual activity coming from? Do I contact the person who's behind this system to see if they're aware of any issues that are happening? So for us, kind of automating a lot of those components out of it has been a big piece for the toil reduction. One thing I want to highlight in particular is our user attestation principle. So rather than having my team going out and asking people every single time we notice something that's unusual, hey, was this you? Do you recognize this? Can you help us figure this out? And this is assuming, of course, that there's no additional context for us to make that determination on our own. We've effectively turned that into a software program, right? So such that if we detect something unusual that we don't have enough information to convict it as being 100% this is bad, we are now we have software now that will reach out to people and say, hey, we noticed this. Can you attest either yes or no, we recognize this activity? If you don't recognize it, our team will get involved and help you with the investigation, figure out what's happening, and discover whether there's truly a threat. If you do recognize this activity, and of course we have fail-safes in place to ensure that the person that's responding to it is actually the person that we care about, and not the attacker themselves. When that happens, that allows us to understand whether or not we need to engage. So simply just having this attestation component, this automation of reaching out to people and asking for their confirmation or not, has reduced toil dramatically. Because now, instead of spending time with the back and forth of, I sent them an email, they didn't get back to me, I contacted them on messaging, haven't heard back, maybe they're on vacation for 2 weeks, we don't know. Right now, we're actually able to do this in a much quicker way. People can look at it on their phone and say, yes, this was me, no, this wasn't. And that gives us a lot more time to build other capabilities and do other things like spending time looking for threats. So that's one of the options that we use. The other nice thing about leveraging automation is that it gives us a lot more consistency in our operations. So having one person may choose to do something one way, someone else may do it another way. When it comes time to audit what we do, audit our processes, audit our investigations, look at our cases, it's a lot simpler for us to say any deviation from the norm is something that we want to look into and understand why that happened. But when you have everyone doing their own thing and gathering data in different ways, different formats, different types, I think that leads to some complexity, and it also makes it harder for newer folks coming on board to understand what's happening, right? If we already have a pretty solid, repeatable process in place up front, when they come in, it's easy for them to say, oh, this is how the team gathers this bit of data. This is how the team responds to this when this situation occurs. So I think that's one of the big things for us there, is making sure that the automation is actually improving our efficiency simply by making things more consistent. That's actually been a pretty big thing. And then I guess also trying to prevent common failures, right? I think I talked about the logging example before. But having someone to go out and troubleshooting every time we have a failure is a lot, right? It takes a long time. Gathering information up front, gathering health checks, gathering leading indicators that show that the data source may be ready to fail, or perhaps we see that there's a change notification happening where we expect a failure to occur, right? These are things that prevent us from having to react so quickly in the middle of the night, and we can kind of prepare ourselves for these changes or for these other issues. So those are the kinds of toil that we're trying to reduce, effectively making it so that when someone comes in to the office to do their job for the day, they're spending more time actually digging into the data and analyzing it themselves, as opposed to trying to keep it rolling and flowing through and keeping it healthy.
So how does your automation perspective help with the approach to zero trust and its security?
Right. So, zero trust is an approach, right? There's a lot of components to it, and some involves technology, some involves kind of, well, I guess you could say philosophy, other involves actual process around that, right? And so with our detection, modernization, and improving our approach here, some of the key pieces that we thought about when we're looking at the zero trust aspects have been, number one, one of the foundational components is, of course, assume breach, meaning that you have to assume at some point you will be breached or you have already been breached. So that has been one of the kind of the key guiding principles for us as well in designing our system, was assume the worst. I think we as incident responders tend to always have that viewpoint because we have seen a lot of weird stuff. But I think that's one of the core parts of it here is we're assuming that someone has actually been breached, and therefore, as a result, we don't necessarily trust things that are coming from the system. And I think that's one of the key pieces. Another reason why we built out this attestation component. Because I think looking at another person on the other end is a lot easier than having an attacker in another country somewhere saying, yeah, this was me. So for zero trust, we have two pieces. One is assume the breach. The other is constant authorization and authentication for every service. And so because of that second component, the constant authorization, we don't expect that whenever I say, oh, it looks like an unusual activity occurred from your system, if I contact you through our software, which again, to reduce our toil, we're doing that automatically. If you're the attacker controlling the system, if you don't have all of our requisite endpoint security in place, and you don't have all the trust components in place, as in you've authenticated recently, you've authorized the right location, the attacker won't be able to respond and say, oh yes, that was normal activity, you can ignore this. And that's one of the big pieces from our attestation workflows there, is that we ensure that the person that's responding to it is actually the person that we're intending to talk to. So for us, that's how it ties into a zero trust, is because number one, it's heavily reliant on hard and strong authentication, which is a big part of our attestation component. but also because we assume that someone is breached, we're also basically forcing those additional authentication components in place before you can tell us again. So we're not going to have a single factor, yes, this was me. We're going to require that someone actually have a physical device that we provided to you, or one that we manage at least, that can tell us what's happening in that situation. So I think that gets around some of the untrusted components where just anyone on the internet can start sending us messages. I think this component here will actually tie us in really well with the zero trust aspects, as well as getting us a quicker response time.
How does the increase in scale and improvement in the timing of threat detection and incident response improve security overall?
Yes, so this is kind of a pretty high level question, and the idea here really is, I think what you're saying is, what do we get from scaling up, right? And how does this make security better? Why should I invest in an improved detection and response program? And the answer is pretty clear, right? I mean, the way most incident response teams in the industry measure themselves is through two key metrics, like two KPIs, if you want: time to detect and time to contain. And that's the effectively, how quickly can we detect as defenders when someone has actually compromised our network or compromised our environment. Time to detect is how quickly we detect it. Of course, time to contain is how quickly we kind of patch things up, triage, stop the bleeding, that sort of thing. So those are really the two core metrics that most teams look into. So when I think about that, I think about time to detect it first, right? And what that really means is, how long was a threat actor or an attacker able to do the operations in our environment without us knowing? We want to take that time down to obviously to zero, so that's such that it never happens. But if there is an incident where that happens and an attacker is successful in breaching, we want to minimize the time of that happening to be as small as possible. So the faster we are at detecting things, the less opportunity the attacker has to cause damage or create further problems. And so for us, that's how I would answer that question: is how do we get better? What security does this get us? And what it really gets us is it reduces the opportunity for an attack. It reduces the exposure for an attack if we can respond quicker. And by reducing both opportunity and exposure, you're also lowering the risk. And I think that's one of the key pieces here, is that we have to get really good and precise at our detections. And of course, we also want to be omniscient as much as possible, where we see everything happening all the time. The reality is that's difficult. The larger your environment becomes, the more legacy systems and environments and business units that you have over time, right? That kind of problem becomes more of a challenge. But I think that's what we're saying here effectively, is that for us, we're actually able to respond faster, provide more security because we're responding faster, and that in and of itself is the key piece for us.
Of course, thank you. So if you had to name a few key takeaways that our audience should be thinking about as they enter 2023 related to these topics, what would you say?
Yeah, I would have I probably have three things that I would say around that, around the future. I'm not great at the the InfoSec predictions every year, but I think what I would probably say is, number one, we can certainly expect a lot more severe software vulnerabilities happening again next year. Just as we did this past year, the year before that, I think we'll have a lot of high severity, high criticality, highly deployed software packages around the world. They're going to create more problems for vulnerability management, incident response teams. So I definitely feel like that's not going anywhere. And what that really means, and why I would say that, is to prepare yourself for it now. And how to prepare for something like that is effectively to ensure that you have an asset in a service database. And I know it's boring, it doesn't sound fun, it's not an exciting project, and it's typically pushed off or deprioritized, but everyone needs to absolutely prioritize understanding what they're actually running in their environment. Because when the next big vulnerability comes out, you want to be able to understand as quickly as possible what's your impact, right? We may have another crazy Sev 10 vulnerability that comes out in January, let's say. But if you know that you don't have any systems that are vulnerable to that, you can move on and worry about the next thing, right? Versus all the hand wringing and answering tough questions about what does this mean for us, right, or whatever. So that's a big thing I'll say there. It's not the most exciting component, but I definitely think that if you know your network, if you know your environment, if you know what you've got, it'll be a lot easier on you when the next big vulnerability comes out and you have to figure out, what do we patch? How do we patch it? How do we triage? So you don't want to be, the key reason why I bring that up is you don't want to be figuring that in the middle of that situation, right? You want to kind of be prepared for that up front. So that would be a big one. There's always a lot of talk every year too around the cybersecurity skills, people, hiring gap, all that, right? So I don't want to beat that dead horse any longer. But what I will say is that it is hard to hire people, for sure, and it's even harder to keep people on the team and keeping them engaged, because it's definitely a job where there's a lot of risk of high burnout when it comes to responding to threats every day, fighting fires, dealing with attacks, that kind of a thing. So what I would suggest there is take a page out of our book, automate as much as possible, focus on improving the quality of life for your engineers, analysts, investigators. That has been a key thing for us for the last 3 or 4 quarters, is essentially saying, what can we do to improve the quality of life such that we can get by with fewer people, but happier people that are more fulfilled on what they're doing. And that fulfillment comes from finding things, preventing attacks, responding, and feeling like you actually made a difference. And so that's what I would say on that component is people that you already have, invest in them and ensure that they're willing to stick around and work on reducing their toil. Because the toil is the thing that adds up the most over time to kind of take the fun out of the day job, but also it reduces your ability to actually be effective because you're not focusing as much as you might because you're worn out from doing this toil aspects. And then finally, I guess the more tactical advice would be, and it's something, again, that we've been investing in over the last year or so, has been investing in kind of early warning systems. So canaries are things that can tell you early on when things are happening or could go bad for your company. So canaries are a great possibility where you see really quickly where something is being, kind of messed with that shouldn't be. Investments in threat intelligence to kind of get you in front of attacks, right? And that's been a big focus for our team as well, is looking at who's targeting us, what are they doing, taking that information and turning it into operational work and preventing these attacks from happening in the first place. I think those are big pieces for people to focus on, is getting ready for the early warning systems. When you look at the news and see every week goes by and there's another victim of ransomware from a gang that's doing these attacks, right? If they had early warning systems in place, I think a lot of these organizations would have been in a lot better situation. I'm certainly not blaming the victims in any case here, but what I do want to strongly recommend is that having these early warning systems in place before the problem happens, before your network becomes encrypted, is a lot easier to recover from than trying to deal with that and cleaning up the mess afterwards. So those would be my key recommendations, I think, for the next year.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. I know our audience appreciates it as well. So that's all the time we have today for this discussion, but thank you, Jeff, so much for a great conversation.
All right. Thank you too, Ashley. It was good chatting.
Thanks go to Jeff and Ashley for that informative discussion. Now remember to click on the pop-up to access the next session, Identifying and Mitigating the Most Critical Security Risks, which will begin shortly. And don't forget to network with all your other attendees right here in the intelligent security community using the community tab. Welcome to the next session, Identifying and Mitigating the Most Critical Security Risks. Liz Bernakovic, Senior Manager of the Global Security Fusion Center at Allstate, will chat with Louis Columbus of VentureBeat about how to create living, adaptive cybersecurity strategies and becoming threat-centric by prioritizing decision-making around expected threats. And remember, you can make comments to the speakers and answer polls through the chat feature in the session.
Hi, everyone. I'm Louis Columbus, a contributor with VentureBeat. Welcome to the Intelligent Security Summit and our session, Identifying and Mitigating the Most Critical Security Risks. I'm excited to speak today with Liz Burnett-Kovic from Allstate. Liz, why don't you tell us a bit about your background and what you do at Allstate?
Awesome. Thanks, Louis. So currently, I work at Allstate as the senior manager in our Global Security Fusion Center. I lead our threat and vulnerability management services. It's a long list of various interrelated complementary services that supports the entirety of our information security program. This includes things like vulnerability management research, penetration testing, exploit development, threat hunting, reverse engineering, data classification, and CASB and shadow IT. So we've got quite a number of pretty highly technical services, and again, services that do really interact and interrelate with other teams and functions in the overall business. Also at Allstate and other places that I've worked, I've stood up our risk management services, cyber risk management, risk acceptance, risk tolerance levels, things like, risk assessments, board reporting. So I've got over 13 years of experience across multiple industries with different sizes, different budgets. I think today, what I really want our goal to be here is to inspire deep reflection. It's something that we don't have a lot of time for these days. It's getting busier and busier, and it's harder for us as leaders and contributors to take the time to make intelligent decisions. Today, security requires unique approaches that are tailored to the organization, business needs, the culture. It requires that thoughtfulness. So hopefully today we can give a little bit of time for reflection and a little bit of inspiration for that reflection.
Thanks for that context. Now I'd like to dive right into what we're sharing with our audience today. To begin with, our first question, how do you recommend companies have a living adaptive strategy with a cybersecurity strategy?
Yeah, Louis, I think adaptive is the key word here. Everybody listening today, I'm sure, is going to be in a different spot. Some might be starting out building a strategy for the first time. Some may need to really revisit and modernize their strategies. But regardless, adaptive is something that we should be trying to attain with this. And so in a journey of the strategy, some of the phases that we might find ourselves in, usually we start from a compliance basis. The business wants a cybersecurity strategy that supports meeting regulatory and other compliance needs. And what we usually find is people are spending less time actually working the strategy and more time tracking the alignment to the different regulations, right? So what we want to really do is try to begin by mapping what those basic requirements are. External requirements like regulations, but also internal requirements that our business, our executives might have for us based on what's important to them. That helps really set the stage for an advanced roadmap that can adapt over time. You'll hear me throughout this conversation talk about how things should change based on need, but maybe not change too much that it makes people feel like it's something new every revision. So some quick tips that I really have around this is, again, making sure that we're working with the business. What are the business objectives? What's important to them? You'll hear a phrase, crown jewels, that comes up a lot now. And really that is, the systems and the data and even just values core to the organization that need to be protected. This is what is important, what makes our brand our brand. And what I like to do is I like to see security become a value add for that brand. Once security is seen as, a value to the customers and really a value to our identity in the organization, that's where we find that we're able to implement some changes, implement that adaptivity to what the business is doing, because we have more regular lines of communication. We don't want to try and boil the ocean. We do want our strategy to be comprehensive. We want it to be visionary. We want it especially to be inspiring. We are not looking for space age, warp speed, aka unattainable approach to a strategy. If it's just too far-fetched, then we're going to have a very hard time absorbing what those intermediary steps in our roadmap are going to look for. And one of the ways that we can really do this is by filling our roadmap with quick wins. Where can we have those quick wins? They energize our partners, that we do need their support, and we need them to, help to carry the message, provide, investment, and in other modes of driving forward. We can't do this in a bubble by ourselves. The way that we make this adaptive is by making risk core. This is obviously what we're here for today. And so risk should be the core driver of the conversation. That's really critical then, obviously, to have those business conversations about what's important. What is the risk appetite of the organization? This is a really hard one. It's very hard to determine that. We'll start with understanding who needs to be a part of those conversations. Who are the influencers that are making decisions or helping others to get the information necessary to make the decision? A lot of times decision makers may actually default to a good bit of feeling, not just logic and numbers in terms of what risks do we accept. What is good enough, right? And what is excellent? Where do we want to be on that scale is a really important conversation to have. And so, like, for example, when I was in higher education, I found that the values that higher education organizations tend to carry made a huge impact on what risks were accepted. I found a lot of risks accepted in the space, but for good reasons, due to user experience and making sure that those core tenets of why they existed and what the organization as a whole believed in were really important to their identity. And so we have to make sure that as we're putting together a strategy, we are indeed taking into consideration the culture and the identity of the business and incorporating that. Another thing that I think is really important to talk about is starting where the business understanding is when we're talking about risk. We as human beings actually all understand risk pretty fundamentally. We look outside the window before we go to work in the morning. We look and we see snow and we know that the risk is higher, and maybe we'll work from home that day, right? That is really doing a risk assessment in the moment. And so we also have to understand how to transition that to cyber. It's not as obvious as one might think. I made a huge mistake in my career that I learned very quickly from, where I was trying to stand up a risk assessment process with a business area. And I really wanted to go with a quantitative approach based on numbers and like true probability. And, for example, I sat down, I talked to the leader and said, there's a probability that this is going to happen with, in the next 5 years. And the leader looked at me and said, well, Liz, I've had this ecosystem available for the last 15 years and I haven't had anything happen. So how can I trust anything that's in this document? It was a blow. But what that really taught me was we weren't ready as an organization for quantitative, for what, everybody else was talking about, right? Nobody else was really there yet, and we weren't ready for it. So I ended up going back to the drawing board, revisiting that in a qualitative manner, which most importantly, it sparked conversation. And that conversation helped them to build an understanding of risk management and how to incorporate it into their business practices. But it also helped give me information that I needed to help adapt the strategy, because it was on the level playing field that it needed to be. So to close this one up, I want to go back to adaptive again and really just ask, what does that mean? It, again, does not mean that we're constantly changing the bar to confuse people. It means that we're being crisp on our key objectives and outcomes. This is that high level vision and what we want to get to pie in the sky. Just a few? No, no overwhelming list, right? It's that ideal picture and dream state that provides the flexibility up and down to pivot our approaches. It's changing with our business needs. It's changing and keeping up with technology and best practices. It's keeping up with the ever-growing amount and changing regulations that are out there that we're subject to. And it, most importantly, incorporates other functions and teams to make sure that the execution is successful. Additionally, it should also have other elements in it that aren't just strictly cyber. And when we go back to how do we make this a value add? Is the business interested in investment opportunities? How can we help with that? How can we partner with DevOps and other budding functions within our organizations and leverage them? Can we provide brand uplifting external visibility? And how do we increase talent retention by helping with things like reskilling and promoting within, since so many people are looking to get into the field?
Excellent. Thank you. What are the layers of controls from network to endpoints? What are the in-between pieces that aren't properly in place or completely missing today?
Good question. So, we're in complex environments and tooling today. So to me, this really is about choosing and maximizing our tech adequately. Think about how many agent endpoints you might have on a machine. Do they have any overlapping functionality where you're using one or the other? Do you utilize all the functionality in each one of these pieces of technology? Have you ever had your engineers chasing strange behaviors, alerts, or issues down a rabbit hole only to find out that there's a conflict between multiple products that you have and they're setting one another off? So our goal should be to have complementary technology. That's easier said than done, or we wouldn't be here today. What we want to do by achieving that is we're demonstrating that we're taking a strategic approach to our technology, that we're budget conscious, which is really important today. And most importantly, that layering demonstrates that we have an understanding of an attack kill chain and how certain attacks may make it several layers in before we catch it when we stop it. And that is important for us, as we'll talk about later, to building that understanding and building the support from executives. So what are some ways that we can work towards that ideal? This isn't about just getting the most versatile tool out there. This is about the function and the function that we need. If you think about something that I like to call mission drift, when we have a very strict, structured mission to, say, help provide homes for, homeless, right? Let's give that an example. And then we find ourselves trying to reach out into the community because we can't home or house everybody. So now we open a food pantry, and now we do a Meals on Wheels to elderly. Each time we do that, it is noble cause, but it is mission drift as well. So what we end up doing, bottom line, is when you try to do it all, or you try to be a one size fit all, you may actually miss that mark drastically. And I do see that in some tooling that is out there if we're not careful about how we choose it. This is a dangerous mention in the conversation that can spark some conflicting opinions, right? But is there open source tooling or capabilities that we can actually integrate into something that we have? It's important that if that is something that the organization supports and even likes, we can't forget about the human resource costs to implement and maintain that. We also can't forget about training for our users and for our admins. That training, that understanding, that feedback that comes back to us is really actually very important, in my opinion, because then they bring that information back in terms of how we can better use tools and how we can better configure them and what features we may not be maximizing our value on. Some other tactics for this is really to have some roadmap alignment review cycles with our vendors. Let's meet with them on a regular basis. Are they still meeting our needs? That includes support, service, SLAs. Where's their roadmap going? And does it align with our strategy and our roadmap and where we're going to continue that partnership? automation and integration are also keys to success for that. Looking for synergies in how we're reducing seats and better controlling our costs based on leveraging things like, APIs. Where are people performing the same actions consistently? That's what you need to automate. Have them help too. Part of the expectations for my teams is that they participate in innovation and in modernization of our tooling and technology. It's really helped us to catapult and even beat the timelines that we were really looking for. And it has an added bonus of really increasing retention, which is very important today as well.
Thank you. Excellent. With regard to emerging tech and controls that leverage AI and machine learning, what are you seeing in terms of inserting or replacing those with traditional controls, and how much trust can you put into those as a cyber professional?
Yeah, this is a tough question around intelligent tooling. Do we replace or do we augment them? My answer is it's going to be different for everyone. This really goes back to the culture and the organization. What is the business appetite for AI/ML, right? Who is the stakeholders in making those decisions, and what's their sentiment on it? Does the culture tend to trust the users or trust the technology? We see this a lot in data classification programs where we either want to leverage the technology to lob a label, or we really want to trust the users, or vice versa. We've seen organizations that don't trust the users, even with training, to make those decisions. And so that's really important on, do we rip and replace or do we augment? And there is cost associated with that as well. Another important consideration is, what curbs are you ready and willing to put on to monitor the tech? Let's not forget Skynet. We need to keep an eye on it, make sure that it's working, and not put in 100% faith in it. We do still need to be able to demonstrate value, and we need to demonstrate that it's working as intended. That keeps a watchful eye on it. And then another thing to help you decide if you're ready to make that jump is really kind of looking at some of your programs, like, for example, Insider Threat. What components do you have already that are fragmented, that could be leveraged more together as a program if you brought all the stakeholders to discuss? And that will help drive those conversations about where we can bring in that automation, where we can bring in some more of these intelligent tooling and have a more streamlined program.
Thank you. What are the top metrics and KPIs a CISO needs to use to track their department's performance over time?
Yeah, so really this comes down to, what's the ultimate goal of communicating metrics. I am a big supporter of not just looking at what do we send up to the top, but what do we have all the way through in terms of metrics from top to bottom. Our frontline folks and our frontline leaders need metrics to make sure that all is going as planned. And the closer that we can get our terminology and understanding of those functions from top to bottom, the better it makes the program in terms of consistency. So really, what we're trying to convey is, at bottom line, costs, risk, and outcomes, right? Is our effort and investment working? Do we need any additional support, action, investment? And how do we use numbers to evidence the need? And how do we build that awareness around cybersecurity and the importance of it? I think everybody knows it's important, but may not understand the why. I always start metrics with building from questions. Who's the audience? What are they asking about? Most importantly, why are they asking about it? They may not actually even know why they're asking a certain question. They may have heard it from somebody else and might be looking for, help from trusted resources to answer it. So why are they asking? What do you need them to understand? And how can you display the bigger picture? We build metrics to be a story, but we also build it like a story. There are multiple volumes in certain storylines, right? And what that tells us is that, just like stories, the metrics change over time, but not so much that there's not continuity and norm. For vulnerability management is a great example of where people oftentimes struggle to have very effective metrics. And oftentimes we start with compliance. How are we meeting compliance? But then we quickly go to how do we extrapolate our results from a compliance perspective to the rest of the environment? That's a pretty quick win, and it gains support for increased visibility. And a lot of times we also start with just numbers. Here's our vulnerabilities. But quickly we start having those conversations that there are so many vulnerabilities and they'll always be there and that number will never get to zero. That's I love when that question comes up. That's when we start talking about vulnerabilities come in and go out, and it's no different than managing any other technology life cycle. And then we start to target timeliness in our metrics, right? And then from there, once we've developed that, we also then start to show impact to the whole ecosystem or comparing against industry metrics so that we can really benchmark ourselves. But it takes that building, that understanding step by step. Show them their investment is paying off, but you have to build that knowledge and that basic understanding first. We also want to watch our metrics over time and make sure that we don't get too many static metrics that don't change. What that does is it makes people tune out. It makes them glaze over and ignore it, right? We're training them then not to pay attention. So it must be interesting and it must be relevant. And if it's not, it might be time to look at how we can either tighten thresholds or, adapt the metric into something new. We also want to have folks avoid panic and shut down with sticker shock. Sometimes it's necessary to rally the troops, but it should always come with an achievable plan and suggestions to get us there in timelines that we think are achievable. No grenades in this case. It will just shut people down. And then don't forget, this is oftentimes left out. What might seem insignificant, it can demonstrate need or effectiveness too, especially for things like automation and machine learning. What are our false positives? What's our tuning process look like? Are we having low value cycles increasing that is just eating resource time that's very expensive and valuable? So those are really important things not to lose sight of. It is costing the business money as well.
Speaking of AI, machine learning, and the intelligence that it generates, how do you use that to become more threat-centric and prioritize decision-making around potential threats?
Right. So intel is, in my opinion, very important. It's also something that will vary greatly between organizations, even in the same industry, but I think it is necessary. It's important for utilization in the program, and the extent will vary greatly, as well as what our focus areas and objectives are. Again, this is something business involvement's important. Once we know what's critical to the business, that helps us develop priority intelligence requirements, or PIRs. That is the most important things for us to keep an eye on. There's so much data and information out there that it gets very overwhelming very quick and can really degrade the quality of an intelligence program. So we definitely want to focus on maximizing the value add. This stuff is expensive, regardless of it's in-house or outsourced, which is a very important conversation to have and see what the needs are, but you have to start from those business needs. And another thing that's really helpful with this is it makes it real for executives, leaders, employees. We all know that investment in cybersecurity is important. I don't think I've ever heard anybody in the last number of years even question that. But this helps to tie into the why. Once we have folks understanding the why, we tend to see a lot more support from everybody. So we need to spend a little time understanding the needs and desires of our leaders that are influential. It makes them feel more involved, and it provides direct value. So we have something that I've done across multiple organizations now called a hush brief. And this is areas where maybe there's something groundbreaking or newsworthy that our executives are keeping an eye on. And while it may not be directly impactful to us, it is still important to give information on. And so our intel team helps to make our folks feel more informed, educated, and able to speak because they're going to get asked questions as well. So those little elements of adding value do wonders for helping an overall information security program. We also should target getting some alignment throughout preventative and response capabilities by using a framework that Intel can inform. So something like MITRE ATT&CK that can really help us across threat hunting, threat intel, vulnerability management, incident response, our risk management folks, using again that common terminology. And so we need to also be clear that there is always going to be gaps in confidence questions. We're never going to have 100% assurance that the intel is right, and we need to get folks comfortable with it and highlight the wins when it comes up. And then one last thing that I think is really important to mention, even though it's more advanced, I do think it's essential for intelligence, is sharing. All right, internal sharing is a two-way street. We're pumping intel out to other organizations or business units, but we also need to pull that intel back. How are they using it? What do they need? Did they find it valuable or not? What are the risks that they're seeing? What are the problems that they're having? And we use that to then inform our intelligence life cycle. And then there's also external sharing where you participate in ISAC or other rings, and you're really able to get some very good value out of that as well. And when you provide that value back in, that is something that can be very strategic for growing the program.
Well, thank you very much. That's all the time we have today for this discussion. And thanks so much for a great conversation and great insights.
Thank you.
Huge thanks to Liz and Lewis for a really awesome chat. To see the next session, internal threats that can create external attack opportunities and how to combat them, please remember to click on the pop-up. And don't forget, we have the speakers joining in a live Q&A roundtable session at 12:30 p.m. Pacific. Do not miss that today. Welcome to the next session, internal threats that can create external attack opportunities and how to combat them. Jason Odell, VP of Security Operations at Walmart, and Mike Britton, CISO of Abnormal Security, are in conversation with Victor Day of VentureBeat, who will discuss the importance of third-party security management for today's data-driven market, identifying insider security risks, and what sorts of training organizations can use to keep their workforces alert and quick to act in the face of a breach.
Hey everyone, my name is Victor Day. I'm tech editor here at VentureBeat, covering everything in AI, cybersecurity to the latest developments in next-gen technology. Joining me today for this discussion are Mike and Jason. Mike, Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Yeah, thanks, Victor. So my name is Mike Britton. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Abnormal Security. And what that means is I run our security and privacy programs for Abnormal Security, and I also manage our internal IT program.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Odell. I'm the Vice President of Security Operations at Walmart. That means I have responsibility for our security operations centers, incident response, cyber hunt, and data assurance globally.
First of all, I would like to thank both of you for joining me for this discussion today. It's a really timely topic and crucial for every security expert out there. As we know that cyber attacks have astronomically increased over the past few years, and an organization's overall security architecture plays a critical role in mitigating such threats from malicious actors. So I look forward to today's discussion and getting crucial insights for everyone watching. Jason, Mike, when we talk about today's threat landscape, the first thing that comes to my mind are third-party threats. And as we've been hearing about so many cases of organizations being affected due to increasingly relying on third parties to bolster their capabilities. And during the same, often third parties are granted access to networks, applications, and resources for legitimate business reasons. So in your opinion, how important is third-party management for today's data-driven market?
Yeah, Mike, I'll go ahead and jump in here if that's okay and start us off. So Victor, it's certainly a conversation that we have quite a bit here, not only internally, but as we're having conversations with others across the industry. And I think if you look over the last couple of years, and if you look at some of the headlines relative to some of the incidents that have occurred and some of the larger breaches that have occurred, third parties are obviously top of mind for everybody. What's interesting about that is it's not fundamentally new. And what I mean by that is third-party compromises leading to a compromise of another organization has been around for quite some time. But what I think is new is the uptick in volume that we're seeing across the industry. And it's not just in conversations and what we've seen, in talking to one another about like what's occurred in the headlines, but also if you look at the Verizon data breach investigation report, what's interesting is if you look at third-party compromises, historically that's been a pretty small subset, right? But if you look at the last Verizon DBIR that they released, it was actually the top category for leading to compromise of an organization.
Yeah, and I would say too, most organizations, we deal with a lot of suppliers and vendors, and most companies have a process to evaluate them and risk assess them. And honestly, it's probably lacking in most situations. You send them a questionnaire, you ask them some fairly static things at the point of onboarding, but how are you actually, monitoring and understanding, okay, that vendor provides a risk or creates a risk for my organization or it doesn't? How do I know that, this small mom and pop marketing vendor that my company wants to use, that they don't get compromised? And while it may not necessarily lead to a target type, breach or something like that, it still offers opportunities for bad guys to compromise email accounts for the vendor or get into their systems and pretend to be that vendor and add that implicit level of trust back to all of their customers. And, that could involve, small, simple threats like fake invoices and things like that still cause financial damage to companies. And, nobody wants to pay a fake invoice to a vendor and then turn around and have to pay, the real invoice to the vendor as well.
Right. And when we talk about organizations here, it's a fact that AI is a critical part of today's digital transformation. as it possesses the prowess to enhance several capabilities when inculcated with the right use cases. So I would like to know, how can AI and cybersecurity go hand in hand? And what would be a few use cases for AI-based cybersecurity system? Mike, being a CISO, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, humans make mistakes, and the more human interaction, human involvement, whether that's security and security operations, or whether that's monitoring controls, or whatever it may be, it's hard to just rely on human review for things. The other thing is, we also have a wealth of data and events. Just the sheer amount of types of traffic we can see, and a user clicking on something or a user logging in. And so when you have all of that data and the ability to correlate and look through and find, patterns in behavior, because, once again, humans make mistakes, but humans are also creatures of habit. And so, if I can baseline and say this person does these same things over and over again, and now here's an event that is anomalous, then that's stuff that now my team, and I'm sure Jason and his team, can dig into and start, finding the needles in the haystack.
Jason, would you like to add to what Mike said?
Yeah, no, that was very well said, Mike. And I think as we look at the threat landscape and see how things have evolved, there's a couple things there that I think about. And one of the things I think about, Mike, in addition to anomalous behavior detection, is also speed for detection and response. And what I mean by that, if you look at threat actors a few years ago and the way that they would go through and monetize, a lot of times, it was a pretty long attack chain. And so if you look at some of the threat actors that would monetize by going after cardholder data, as an example, they'd have to gain access to an organization, and then they would have to escalate privileges. Then they'd have to recon, and then they'd have to find out where the cardholder data is at. And from there, they would have to figure out how to get the cardholder data out of the enclave and out of the environment. And if you look at threat actors now, especially with ransomware being a monetization scheme, the attack chain is shortened. And so I think AI and ML give us opportunities to detect sooner so that containment can also happen sooner. And that's based on the conversations that we're having across the rest of the industry. Because, Mike, as you said, one of the important things is not only the quick detection, right, based on anomalous behavior, but also looking for opportunities to very quickly automate the response when it's warranted.
Right. And you rightly said, Jason. And recently we've seen machine-based transaction attacks are one of the fastest growing online retail frauds. And I believe that while handling security operations at Walmart, you must come across different types of malicious activities. So what are a few AI-based detection methods that can help and can be used to understand such fraudulent activities?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. And Mike alluded to this a little bit in his previous answer, and I'll pull on that a little bit. But when you look at the volume of data that organizations have access to now, it used to be, how do you possibly find badness in this huge volume of data? But using AI and ML, we can actually flip that problem on its head and use that telemetry to more quickly identify badness. And I'll give you an example of like how the organization here is using AI and ML, and how we as security practitioners should be looking at that as well. So if you look at Thanksgiving, one of the things we did over our Sam's Clubs this year is we used an AI model to predict how many pumpkin pies we would have to have in inventory over our Sam's Club locations. And so we pulled in a lot of data inputs, things like, okay, what's the shelf life of pumpkin pie? What's the temperature at the local Sam's Club? Because it actually influences, if it's hot or cold, whether or not people will go out and buy pumpkin pie for Thanksgiving. Along with what historical usage has been over at that location, along with whether or not pumpkin pie was trending versus pecan pie over the course of the year. So when you look at that, it's all taking inputs, right? And those inputs are helping us make decisions. And as information security practitioners, all we have to do is take that to the next step. In other words, using AI to predict outcomes is great, but as security practitioners, when the predicted outcome isn't what we'd expect, that becomes really interesting to look at. And something that we say here as a part of our threat hunting program frequently is rare is not always bad, but bad should invariably be rare. And what we mean by that is Sure, we'll see rare things sometimes, and it may just be a bad business process or something along those lines. But threat actors will always leave some kind of artifact that will look different than a typical user. And using AI and ML along with large data sets helps us triangulate and identify that.
Yeah, and coming at this from an email perspective, kind of like what Jason alluded to earlier, tools have historically relied on, known bad indicators of compromise and, hey, this is a bad email domain or a bad email address. And, the threat actors have really shifted their tactics. So they're no longer using a compromised domain and using it over and over again. What we see is, they spin up and, they've even automated a lot of this and commoditized it where, they can use a single bad Gmail account to attack a single victim and never use it again. And so, part of the challenge in using, legacy tactics to defend against that is by the time I've blocked it, the bad guy's already moved on to a different email and a different victim. And so by leveraging, AI and machine learning, we can start digging into the covers and understanding, hey, this is normal behavior. This is normal interaction between these two users. Or, hey, Mike doesn't normally send Jason an email while logging in from Germany, and now he just sent him an email from Germany. Or Mike and Jason talk all the time, but they never talk about payments and invoices. And now Mike just sent Jason an invoice referencing an account number that's never been mentioned before. And so by being able to pull out those little facets of information that may look benign to a user or may not even be visible to a user, we can start leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning to say, hey, that's not normal. That's indicative of an attack, or that's indicative of somebody else behind the keyboard on this email account. Even if this is a normal, good email account, someone's taken it over.
Absolutely. And talking about threats, another growing hazard that we're witnessing right now in the security landscape is insider risk. Which brings me to the question, what are a few methods that can be used to identify insider risk? And I would also like to know that are silent quitters creating new security risks for enterprises?
Yeah, I'll take this one first. One of the things that we introduced at Abnormal Security recently is a knowledge base in our platform called People Base. And what it does is it looks at your Microsoft 365 environment, and it looks at people and takes a contextual view of, hey, what's your position within the organization? Are you in finance and accounting? Are you a VIP? What's your level of risk as an individual? And then what are the actions and activities you're doing? And are those things, indicative of someone that is, leaking data to their personal Gmail account, or, sending things to others that they shouldn't be? Or maybe they're a target of, fake CEO emails, or, threat actors sending, fake invoices, and really starting to look at your user population within your organization as, here are my riskier users, and here are the users that are not only being attacked, but here are the ones that are being impersonated and potentially targets of credential phishing and other type of attacks that could put them, because after all, if I have an account takeover, that's an insider risk because that person's on the inside now. They're acting as one of my employees, and we tend to think of insider risk as a malicious or somebody that has elevated privileges that's now a bad actor that's a regular person, and those do happen. But there's also other forms of insider risk, and those could be account takeovers. And you mentioned the silent quitting. Those could also be people that, they're just kind of fed up with the, company atmosphere and what's going on in the world. And, they've just decided that, they're not going to pay attention, or, they're going to start sending stuff out to a personal email or whatever the form, all of them create some level and degree of risk for the organization.
Yeah, Mike, I think those are really great points. And I really liked how you highlighted when we talk about insider risk, it's beyond just looking at potential malicious insider. And the way I look at it is it's identity being misused. And identity either being misused by a threat actor or identity being misused by the owner of the identity. But either way, I think you treat the problem the same way. What I mean by that is looking for activity, anomalous behavior associated with that identity that you haven't seen before. Because once again, whether or not if you're talking about a malicious insider or whether or not you're talking about, to your point, threat actor going after credentials, that identity will be misused in some way in order to get to the end objective. And what that means is it should look unusual. And when you look at your network telemetry, your endpoint telemetry, and your identity telemetry, and combine all those things together, once again, you'll see behavior that will be unusual. For example, if all of a sudden a user is going over to a server they've never been before and accessing files they've never been before, that could be a sign that something is askew, or it could be just maybe they have a new role or position. But regardless, those are the types of things that are always interesting to look at, and where AI and ML can help us.
Absolutely. And in the beginning, we talked about an organization's overall security stack plays a critical role. So, Jason, can you tell us about how you have upgraded your tech stack from a machine learning perspective?
Sure, I'll speak to that at a high level. So we do leverage AI and ML within the organization, and we do it in a couple of different ways. One of those is, if you would have asked me this question, I think a few years ago, I think there were a lot of vendors that were coming to the table and saying that they had AI and ML ready capabilities, and assuredly, I'm sure some of them did, but it wasn't. I think we hadn't arrived at that point to the way that we've arrived today, where a lot of third parties that are bringing in AI and ML are delivering on that, and so there's actually steak with the sizzle, if you will. And so when we're partnering with companies, we're looking for those types of capabilities because we certainly expect, based on the volume of data we see in our security operations center, we process a little bit north of 6 trillion data points per year. And so being able to leverage those capabilities with the companies that we do business with, we partner with, is very important to us. But also when we're partnering together with those platforms, the question that we've really been asking a lot too is, what are you doing from a defensibility perspective when it comes to AI and ML? So when we talk about, if a threat actor is trying to poison the model or poison the data, what kind of resiliency do you have in place? And so that's all with our partners. And we have several of those that are leveraging those capabilities today. And then we're using some ML models in-house for some platforms that we've created on our own. Because there are some instances where we have a lot of great partners that solve a lot of issues for us and help us work together to solve issues. But sometimes we have some use cases where we have a need to go out and try to identify ways to solve certain problems on our own. And in those instances, we use ML along with our large data sets to solve some of those problems.
Yeah, and like Jason mentioned too, probably wasn't that long ago that every security vendor liked to talk about AI and ML, and it was the popular buzzword for a few years. And regardless of the vendor, they all use that. And one of the things I liked about Abnormal, because I've been here for 20 months, but I came from a financial services company where I was the chief information security officer there, and actually put Abnormal in place there, and saw that. One of the things I liked about them is both of the founders weren't from cybersecurity; they were actually from ad tech. And Jason mentioned the pumpkin pies and being able to know when was the optimal time to sell, and what was the ideal temperature and all that good stuff. That's the world of ad tech. Ad tech is one of those spaces where behavioral data science and artificial intelligence and machine learning has been used very successfully. If you're in doubt, go, flip on Netflix and see what shows it tells you want to go watch. And, that's all the data science behind that. And that is a lot of fancy machine learning algorithms that help predict that stuff. And, our founders took that same knowledge and that same background from ad tech and created our security product. And, when you talk about what I've got in my tech stack here, obviously we protect our email environment with our own product. And so that is a big way we're leveraging machine learning today within Abnormal ourselves.
Fantastic. And I know we'll be running out of time soon. So before we wrap our wonderful session, I would like to have quick opinion on what kind of training programs can organizations use to keep their workforce alert and quick to act in the face of a breach. Mike, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think training and awareness is always going to have a place because at the end of the day, there's not going to be a technology out there that is 100% that's going to catch every single possible thing because you're dealing with an adversary that is always pivoting and looking for ways around controls and around, the technology that companies use to protect their users. So, you always want your users to, be aware and knowledgeable and at least, kind of be cyber savvy to a degree. I would also argue that, I want my finance and accounting and my HR people to focus on their real jobs. And so I don't expect them to be as smart and as trained as my security staff, but I expect them to at least, be aware enough to see something that doesn't look right and be suspicious enough and really know what to do in those type of situations. And so, I think there's always going to be a role for it. I'm a big fan of, training and testing and simulations that help, they're bite-sized. You hit your users more frequent. I'm not a big believer in, very boring and static, once a year training that, checks a box, even though, it's important to check those boxes. I like hitting people, in 15-minute spurts here in different formats and different media types and really just try to engage the users to, first and foremost, if something's wrong, I want them to reach out to my team. And so that's really the end goal of all of our training and awareness is really just to get them to come to me and my team when they see something that doesn't look right.
Yeah, I really like that, Mike. I like, the mentality of having the users look, go do your job, do the things that you do really well. But if you see something, having that awareness to go ahead and bring it to you and your team so your team can perform the follow-up and analysis. And, I think as we go through this conversation together, really, we've been talking about automation and AI and ML, but really, in order to have the right controls in place, it also requires a defense in depth strategy. And that's part of what security awareness training is providing that defense in depth strategy. I've heard some people across the industry at times say, is security awareness training worth it? Because ultimately you're going to have a user click on that email or go to that website. But I would suggest it's one component and a critical component of any information security strategy because I've worked response, I've been a part of response at organizations over, almost the last 20 years now. And I can tell you when working in response for an organization, whether it's in a consulting role or otherwise, it is very different if you have 200 users click on a link versus 20 users click on a link when you're dealing with response and trying to perform the subsequent follow-up, right? So I think it's incredibly effective as a part of the program. We trained 1.5 million associates and vendors last year. We try to do it, like Mike said, dynamically. So it's not just the typical computer-based training, although we do some of that, but we also have phishing simulations and other things that try to bring a general awareness to our end users, as well as our vendors to make sure that we're resilient as possible when it comes to those types of attacks.
Excellent. Well, thank you once again, both of you, for joining us today for this intriguing discussion and sharing your insights and wisdom with everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks go to Jason, Mike, and Victor for that really informative and educational chat. Now, to see the next session, of course, you're going to click on that pop-up. It's called Becoming Secure by Design. So click on that pop-up. Don't forget to do that. And also don't forget to network with all your other peers right here using the community tab. There's an awful lot of you here right now, so do have a chat with each other.
At SolarWinds, we developed our Secure by Design initiative to be the gold-plated standard for cybersecurity. Secure by Design means developing security into our products and our development lifecycle. It's headlined by our next-generation build system, a new way to develop secure software. This is about becoming a leader in enterprise software security.
Next up is the session Becoming Secure by Design. Please welcome Tim Brown, CISO of SolarWinds, Adam Myers, Senior VP of Intelligence at CrowdStrike, and Dan Muse of VentureBeat as they discuss how organizations can develop a secure by design approach to harden internal environments and software build processes, as well as the best steps every company can take, such as implementing safer software build processes, leveraging zero trust, deploying red teams, and more. And remember, you can make comments to the speakers and answer polls through the chat feature in the session.
Good morning. I'm Dan Muse, Managing Editor and Content Director at VentureBeat, and welcome to the Intelligent Security Summit and today's session, Becoming Secure by Design. We're excited to have two expert panelists with us today. Tim Brown from SolarWinds and Adam Myers from CrowdStrike. Could you take a minute, Tim, and just introduce yourself and talk about SolarWinds and your role there?
Yeah, absolutely. So Tim Brown, so I'm the CISO for SolarWinds. I've been running security for SolarWinds for about 5 years. I officially took the CISO role about 2 years ago. So SolarWinds itself has been around for over 20 years. We've really been a provider of network management software, systems management software, really tools that help the IT professional and the DevOps professional really do their job. So again, been around for many years, count, a few 100,000 customers worldwide as our customer base.
Thanks, Tim. And Adam, can you tell us about your role at CrowdStrike and the company and its position in the marketplace?
Sure, yeah. Thanks for having me. Adam Myers. I run threat intel at CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike's been around for about 11 years and just over 11 years. And we really look to change how the industry was securing things back 11 years ago by thinking about how could we bring machine learning, artificial intelligence, and cloud-delivered endpoint to the market. And when we were doing that, we kind of started with this premise that there was a lot of threats going on back in 2010, a lot of adversaries. Many might remember Operation Aurora and some of the Chinese hacking stories that began to kind of circulate in the media at the time. And we started kind of communicating to our customers and prospects that there's a threat out there and you have to treat that threat, humans, appropriately, because they're not just malware. And so if you think about who these humans are, how they operate, what they're after, then you're going to be in a better position to defend not only your enterprise, but your business.
Thanks, Adam. And while today's session is on building secure by design, we thought it might make sense, Adam, if you could, since you're in a great position at CrowdStrike, to sort of set the stage of where we are right now. Where are the biggest threats?
Yeah, so obviously the last year has been pretty tumultuous. We've seen quite a bit of activity as it pertains to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. There's also been a lot going on in Iran, especially recently with the protests that have been kicking off, and certainly within China, who has been focused on becoming a global hegemon and has intentions towards Taiwan and has been really using cyber operations to enable espionage, economic espionage, political espionage, military espionage, and to advance their causes. And all of these nation-state threat actors are kind of the big three, but we also track many others. North Korea targeting fintech and cryptocurrency very heavily. And of course, e-crime actors who have been very much engaged in ransomware historically over the last couple of years, what we call big game hunting here at CrowdStrike. And we're seeing that pivot too, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, but one of the pivots that we're seeing them move into is that they're kind of moving away from ransomware, data encryption and extortion, and moving towards purely data extortion, where they steal the data and threaten to disclose it, leak it to the internet if they're not paid. And it's easier and faster for them, and it can be much more devastating for their victims, given regulatory and legal implications of losing sensitive customer data and sensitive data. And I think what we've seen is an escalation in how these threat actors operate across all of the ones that I've mentioned. And I think one of the things that's really important to get into as we talk with the SolarWinds crew and get into kind of what's happened there previously is supply chain attacks. We've seen a number of these supply chain attacks impacting not just closed source software, but also open source software. And threat actors have been looking for the path of least resistance. They look for the easiest way to get into a target. And one of the other things that kind of factors into that supply chain as well is some of the managed services and telecoms and ISPs that are out there, because threat actors love to go after those types of organizations and then move upstream at their customers in order to exploit that trust relationship.
Great. Thanks, Adam. Tim, can you take a minute and maybe touch briefly on, a few years ago, the Sunburst attack, and then talk about how it spurred a need for a different approach to security, and how that led to building a secure by design architecture?
Yeah, absolutely. So, about 2 years ago, we're coming up on an anniversary there. So, Adam was one of our first calls on December 13th. December 12th, 2020, we were informed by FireEye that we had essentially shipped tainted code within some of our versions of products. Turned out that there were 3 versions that were shipped between March and June that had the tainted code in it. One of the things that we kind of quickly established was that this source code was not in our source code repository. The code that we shipped was not there. Hence, day 2, when we announced that this occurred, we called it a supply chain attack. Because it was our internal supply chain. It was what was going on to build the product. One of the things I don't think we realized, or I didn't realize at that point, was how big the larger supply chain issue was going to be. And by meaning larger, I mean, yes, it happened to us. So our small supply chain says, well, something happened between product code and product. But then when the announcement went out, it was said, okay, what parts of larger supply chains are we in? Are we in the electrical grid? Are we in the manufacturing industry? Since we monitor networks, we were part of those bigger supply chains everywhere. So, when this happened, we said, okay, well, first thing we do is take care of customers, right? We make sure customers understand whether they're protected, whether they're affected or not, whether they're potentially affected, get them to a place which is good, get them to a place where they are, in a safe place. So we started with investigations, brought CrowdStrike in for about 5 months, brought, KPMG's cyber and forensic team in, brought Chris Krebs and Alex Stamos in. So brought a number of helpers in to be able to work through the incident itself and get to a better place. But at the same time, it was, okay, how do we instill trust back into the community? And that really was what spurred the Secure by Design approach. And think of Secure by Design as an umbrella, right? And within that umbrella structure is, okay, let's fix and make our IT infrastructure much more resilient to attack. Let's make our build environment much more resilient to attack. And let's do things to really be inventive and new on making a secure build environment. Let's help the community, right? Let's really build out the community approach, help governments of the world with their regulations, and as they're looking at improving overall security for basically the world through more transparency. And finally, let's build out the security team and the security efforts that we're doing to gain more visibility, to be more proactive on red teaming, to be able to do more essentially audit in the middle. So Secure by Design works all of those things together, puts them under the program that we can track, that we can build, that we can talk to customers and talk to industry about.
So I guess in terms of, looking at today's landscape, and, I watched your video on Sullivan's website, which had great information. And there were a couple comments about how, threat actors today are patient, persistent, precise. So given all that, how do you stay ahead of that? What's the approach both companies, you guys take to kind of keep up?
I'll take it. Adam can take it. Adam, go ahead first, then I'll go.
Sure. So, at CrowdStrike, within our intelligence collection, we track over 188 threat actors today. That includes the nation states that I mentioned earlier: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, India, Pakistan. Lots of nations are getting into this, and I think COVID was a huge driver for that, right? If you think about the way that the borders had locked down back in 2020 and 2021, that stopped a lot of movement of people. It stopped a lot of the traditional intelligence collection mechanisms that nation states were engaged in. And as a result, cyber became really the only game in town for a lot of them. at that time. So we've seen an increase in activity as well as the proliferation of those capabilities to other nations. Criminal threat actors make up well over a third, if not closer to a half of all the threats that we track. And they have continued to evolve. They've continued to look for new scams and schemes that they can engage in. They've looked for new ways to be creative and to get access to generate revenue. We're seeing them proliferate into places like Australia and the UK and Europe. There's a lot more criminal activity occurring there, and that is opening up new markets for them. And of course, hacktivism with the situation in Ukraine over the last year, we've seen both pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian hacktivist groups getting involved in different operations, defacements, info leaks, hack and leaks, things of that nature. And so this is really kind of a continuing and evolving problem, and understanding how those threats are evolving and where they're moving. If that old hockey adage, right, of don't skate to where the puck is, skate to where it's going. And so intelligence and understanding these threats really drives that behavior. And then once you understand it, once you're there, having the right technology in play in order to defend against those attacks, right? So when we first launched the company 11 years ago, the premise was really revolutionizing endpoint security with things like EDR and next-gen AV with antivirus being evolved with machine learning and artificial intelligence. Well, today, as the threats are moving, as I said earlier, into more data extortion, zero trust is really becoming the dominant concern, right? If you look at some of the breaches that have occurred in the last year, I mean, major trillion-dollar companies getting hacked by 17-year-old kids who bought credentials on the dark web and used a $20 credential to provision their own multi-factor authentication. We've evolved. We're no longer in a world where we used to say trust but verify. And now it's verify, then trust. And using zero trust, using identity protection, identity management is absolutely critical. It's table stakes now for organizations that want to defend themselves against every threat, ranging from a 17-year-old up through advanced, nation state espionage programs that have thousands of people involved in them. And some of the best training in the world. So really using the right technology is a critical component. Having the right people, the right team together is also critically important. And having mature process. And Tim can certainly speak to how SolarWinds had really put a lot into their code review on the code before it went into the build environment. And the threat actor had to evolve their tactics to go after that build environment, which enabled them to deploy that code. And so having the right process in place and revising and evolving that process, secure by design being one of those core tenets. And then finally, having the intelligence to understand what's going on, right? Having intelligence on the threat actor, having intelligence on the vulnerabilities, and being able to operationalize that intelligence to evolve your program and to make sure that you are secure by design.
Yeah, great points, Adam. Other things, right? Zero trust shouldn't be considered a product, right? Zero trust is an attitude, and it's more than just a product. So when people say, I have a zero trust product for you, they fill some of the gaps, right? No question. But, when you think about zero trust, one of the things part of secure by design is assume breach, right? So do we have places, can one person affect my build today? So one tainted person affect my build today? And the answer is no, right? You need collusion amongst multiple people in order to affect builds. So taking those assume breach models and zero trust models into practice are really upping the game. It's saying, okay, well, if I have a very sophisticated mission-centric threat actor, they're going to need to get more. They're going to need collusion amongst multiple people. They're going to need to circumvent things. Are getting more visibility, right? So, as Adam talked about CrowdStrike's, monitoring their monitoring service, right? For me, that's one. Then feed it to another MSSP. Then I feed it to my SOC because I want visibility across the entire environment. Again, part of secure by design is more visibility across the environment. Next generation build system. We build multiple times. We have multiple pipelines. No one user has access to all of the pipeline. I before I ship, I compare my production and my staging of verification pipeline. If they don't match, I don't ship. And since no person has access to both, you would need collusion at least with two people to be able to make that happen. So safeguards like that across the environment really help raise the bar. And that's part of secure by design, is raising the bar on security throughout. One of the other things that we have to remember is that, yes, we have a lot of threat actors, a lot take the easy route, but not all of them. So a part of our job as defenders is to outthink that adversary. And thinking is sometimes overrated, but we really do need to think. We need to process. We need to red and purple team our efforts from the back end, because that's what the adversaries are doing. The ones that are really motivated are sitting there and thinking about, okay, how do I get by this? How do I get by this? They'll use whatever mechanism is possible to do that. Hence, that's what we saw in our attack. Very thoughtful attacking model.
Thanks, Tim. Just shifting gears a little bit. So recently, President Biden came out with this directive on software supply chain security. I was just wondering, for both of your takes on that. There was a previous cybersecurity directive from the White House as well. How are these affecting your company and your customers? And I guess, do you see these kind of directives as a good thing for the industry?
I'll take from the vendor perspective. So I think these are good, right? I think a lot of the software supply chain issues that were highlighted from, basically the Sunburst attack were important, right? Because some of the things that people didn't understand was in the larger supply chain, since our product was not priced very high, right? We were not considered a critical component to certain sensitive environments, so power and energy and manufacturing and others. When they look at their critical components, since we were whatever, $50,000 and the whole project was $1 billion, we never even got to the point of being a concern in the supply chain. So looking at the supply chain now, people are shifting. They're saying, well, you're critical if you have access to the network. You're critical if you have access to data. You're critical if you have access to underlying systems. So in our case, we have access to the network, and therefore we should have been critical to that model. So that's the bigger supply chain. The smaller supply chain is really SBOMs and creating software bill of materials for products and determining, hey, inside of this product are these open source components or these third-party components that may or may not be vulnerable. So a lot of work being done on standardizing what information gets communicated, standardizing on do compensating controls exist for that vulnerability or that piece of software? Because we know that products that have been built over the years, they're not going to be running always the latest libraries that exist. But are they vulnerable to a known exploit is kind of what the question we're trying to ask and answer. So I think it's starting us in the right direction. And I think it's important that we go down in that direction and kind of support those efforts moving forward.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, I'd say that to piggyback on that, 2 years ago in December 13th, was a big, surprise with the SolarWinds Sunburst attack and the ensuing couple of months that occurred with certainly myself and Tim and everybody engaged on that team working around the clock to try to understand what happened and to make sure that it couldn't happen again. But then a year later, the next December surprise, which is unfortunately becoming a bit of a theme now, was Log4j, which happened right about a year later on December 9th, if I remember correctly. It was a Thursday.
Yep.
And usually it's either a weekend or the end of the week. I think we can always count on that.
Yep.
But a lot of that policy that you alluded to, I think, came from the fact that there were thousands of products. CISA, JCDC had thousands of products collated on a GitHub repository that were vulnerable software packages that were running Log4j. And I think that a lot of people were completely caught off guard with the fact that it's such a trivial exploit. I mean, if you remember, right when it happened, kids were talking about the vulnerability and the way to exploit it on Minecraft and triggering the vulnerability in the chat servers on Minecraft. And I remember waking up and my 6-year-old son was like, "What's wrong with Minecraft?" And I was like, "Oh boy," So exactly. So having the understanding of what software packages are part of other software packages is absolutely critical, and I think that that caught everybody off guard last December, and I guess we'll see what this December holds. Right? It's coming up in just a few days, so it's always something surprising, right? What Santa's got in his bag of tricks.
Yeah. And just kind of following up on that, Adam, in terms of 2023 and what might be on the threat landscape. I read recently that the average CISO is working 16 and a half hours of additional time. So 56 plus hours a week already. So looking ahead, I mean, what do you think CISO should be most focused on in 2023, or is it the kind of thing where you can't really predict that far ahead?
Yeah, let me find my crystal ball. Let's hear something now. So, look, I think what we're seeing, one, that there's always the unknowns, right? I won't go full Donald Rumsfeld here, but there are the unknown unknowns. We don't know what that's going to be, and that's that December surprise. But we know that the threat actors are moving towards more data extortion. That ransomware has historically been. And if you think about ransomware, the calculus of does an organization pay the ransom really came down to downtime. That's why healthcare and manufacturing and so many industries and state and local governments were heavily targeted, because downtime could be measured in reputation or dollars and cents. And the calculus for the victim becomes how much downtime before the ransom demand is less money than this is costing you. And if you look at how the negotiations happen, what that playbook typically looks like, it would always be kind of like a movie hostage situation, right? A ransomware attack occurred, threat actor demanded, let's say, 25 Bitcoin, and then the victim starts playing this game, what's Bitcoin? I'm not authorized. And as they drag out that negotiation process, they're frustrating the threat actor. Hopefully that threat actor makes a mistake that can be capitalized on. And they're grinding them down on price, right? So we're lowering it from 25 to 5 to 1 Bitcoin or whatever it might be. Ideally, that's kind of the game that got played. The threat actors hate that. They don't like to be ground down on price. They don't like people wasting their time and making them negotiate. And so they looked at ways to kind of escalate that. So, beginning 2 or 3 years ago, we started seeing what people were calling double extortion, which was the data theft and the threat to disclose that data and the ransomware occurring at the same time. I don't think that was really a double extortion or an attempt to increase the amount of money that they were making. I think that was an evolutionary step. And what we've seen now in the last couple of months is that more threat actors are focused on data leaks, data extortion, because the calculus changes, that negotiation changes, right? So when I steal your data and you say, look, I don't know what Bitcoin is, or I'm not authorized, my response is going to be, all right, well, I'm going to leak 10 gigs of your most sensitive data, and let's see if you figure it out, right? And so now I've got the control back as the threat actor in that process, in that negotiation, which is exactly where I want to be, right? I want to have that control and have the levers that I could pull. And so those threat actors moving into that kind of realm, that type of activity, we've seen them stop using ransomware as much. We see them using ransomware as more of a disruptive impact rather than like the key thing. And for the threat actor, it's less work because they don't have to deal with encryption keys. They don't have to deal with walking somebody through the decryption process and how to decrypt files that might have been double encrypted or whatever it might be. Yep. And so it becomes easier for them. It becomes faster for them, and they have control. So that's where this is going, right? So that's kind of my prediction for 2020.
Basically.
Data. Yeah, and if you think about what that means, right? If I'm stealing that data and threatening to disclose it, the legal and regulatory cost of that goes through the roof, right? There's going to be class action lawsuits. There's going to be government agencies coming to ask about, HIPAA or SEC or whatever it might be. And so that's going to make that calculus of do I pay or not pay different. And presumably in the short term to midterm, that's going to result in more payments, faster payments, and more money in each payment for these threat actors. So that's where this is going. And as Tim pointed out, adopting that zero trust mentality of not trust but verify, but verify then trust. As we move into that realm, and there's technology certainly that helps enable that, but that concept of zero trust and identity management, identity protection is absolutely critical.
One of the questions I like to ask all my folks and the CISOs, do they know what they would pay for? If you don't know what you're going to pay for and what you would be willing to pay for, and you don't have a good list of what you're trying to protect, right? You should always go through those exercises and pre-exercise those things so you determine, hey, if this occurs, this is what I'll pay, or this is what I wouldn't pay for, or doesn't matter to me. So understand your thresholds, understand what is important to you, because you can't protect everything. So, make sure that you're protecting those things that matter the most.
And a step further, and Tim certainly I know does this, right? But tabletop exercises, they don't cost money necessarily to even do. You could bring in outside experts to help with that. But, going through and saying like, okay, there's a ransom demand. What are we going to do? Who are we going to call, right? The first call, you're going to call in, potentially a law firm, outside counsel to become a breach coach or breach coordinator to help the organization. So like, if you don't know who you're going to call, what you're going to do, you play like you practice. And if you don't practice, you're going to fall on your face. And that's not a good look.
Yep. No, absolutely. So always practice and make sure you're prepared. Make sure you're prepared for the hard question. Make sure you understand what is worthwhile in your organization. And, we talk crown jewels a lot, but what are those pieces that really truly matter that you're willing to, either pay or potentially negotiate for? So all of those things matter in, your overall secure by design, because it is planning for response as well.
Yeah, and I mean, even the PR side of that, right? If you look at something like one of the larger security and software companies in the world got breached by a 17-year-old kid, and when you start to look at what was the impact of that, what was the PR impact of that? Are you going to trust an organization like that with your security if they can't even protect themselves against a 17-year-old kid? Those questions are the things that you need to be thinking about when you're doing these tabletop exercises, to understand like how are we going to react to this.
Well, as always, I wish we had more time because I have like 6 other questions to ask you guys. But Tim and Adam, thanks so much for taking the time today. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure our viewers did as well. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Huge thanks to Tim, Adam, and Dan for a really impactful conversation. A lot of great takeaways right there. Now on to the last session, indeed. Investing in technologies and people to defend financial institutions. Click the pop-up to access that session. And don't forget, 12:30 p.m. Pacific, you have the speakers in the live Q&A roundtable session. Don't miss that for sure.
At SolarWinds, we developed our Secure by Design initiative to be the gold-plated standard for cybersecurity. Secure by Design means developing security into our products and our development lifecycle. It's headlined by our next generation build system, a new way to develop secure software. This is about becoming a leader in enterprise software security.
All right, welcome to the last but not least session of today's Intelligent Security Summit. We're very pleased to have Doria Ferranti, Senior VP of Product and Payment Services Risk, and Tim Keary of VentureBeat. They're going to share how, why, and which solution security leaders and financial institutions are doubling their investment in.
Hi there, my name is Tim Carey. I'm VentureBeat security editor, and I've been writing about enterprise technology and cybersecurity for almost 5 years. Dory, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, great. Thanks. It's great to be with you today. So I'm Doria Ferrante, and I lead up our product and payment services risk team here at Visa.
Well, thank you for agreeing to speak to us today. I think we'll get some great insights into kind of the defensive mindset that organizations can embrace to deal with the next generation of threats, not just in financial services, but more broadly as well. So to kind of kick us off, would you be able to tell us what you see as the biggest challenges facing organizations in the current threat landscape?
Yeah, so I'd say we're living in an always-on digital world. And with digital and that connectivity, that global connectivity, comes a large attack surface, both for individuals as well as businesses. So I just think that the sheer nature of everybody being online and doing commerce online and moving money, across borders, the bad actors are going to where we are. That's where we work, that's where we play, that's where we shop, that's where we communicate. And so I think this is supercharged by the pandemic, for sure. The threat has only increased inherently. But by us being online and transacting and going about our daily lives, it's just attack surface for bad actors, and we need to be very mindful of that threat landscape.
So in terms of the threats that kind of face modern organizations, what role does human risk play in this?
Well, humans are a big risk, and I think bad actors are doing two things. Number one, they exploit technical as well as human vulnerabilities. And when the technicals and the technology and the algorithms and the models and the artificial intelligence become so strong, bad actors are only forced to go to the weakest link. So if you think about it as the balloon effect, we've squeezed with the amazing technology that companies have around the globe, we've squeezed that to be really painful for bad actors, that they don't get as much action out of it. So then they go to the humans and they try to get us to click a link. And, the numbers are staggeringly high still. So 95% of successful cyber attacks are still due to human error. They originate back to us clicking a link, getting an email, getting a text, answering the phone, and giving away information that we should not be giving away. So again, if you think about it in terms of both technical vulnerabilities and human vulnerabilities, the weakest link is definitely humans, because humans are human by nature, and the human eye can't sometimes pick up some of the red flags, which are glaringly obvious and picked up by technology, no problem.
I mean, how can organizations kind of respond to that kind of reality? How can you support employees and make sure that they don't fall for these kind of scams like social engineering and stuff like that rely on them making mistakes like clicking on emails and stuff like that?
So it all comes down to training and awareness. And, there's training and awareness might seem very analog in the digital world. Now, there's ways that you can leverage technology at a company too, to make sure that you have a zero trust architecture and that you assume that all movement within your four walls and your systems is not good movement, and you're preventing that. But more importantly, companies need to celebrate Cybersecurity Awareness Month. They need to celebrate cybersecurity awareness all year round, to make sure that people understand what are the threats. How do you identify the threats as a first step? How do you raise those to people in your organization so that they can be investigated? And then, what are those red flags that are continually evolving? So one of the things about threat landscape is that threats are not static. They evolve, they're dynamic. And so what might have been the biggest threat a year ago might not be the biggest threat today. And so it's this continual education. If business email compromises, as an example, is something going on around the world, you should take the chance and the opportunity to talk to all of your employees about that. Here's what a business email compromise is. Here's what we want you to be mindful of. The minute you see one, please send it to the phishing team. Please send it to your cyber team to be investigative. So I think you can't over communicate enough when it comes to cybersecurity risks. And you need to make sure that your employees feel that they're supported in terms of, if they see something, where do they go? And who can they call in terms of, questions that they may have about an email, that whether it's legitimate or not.
And how often should these kind of conversations be taking place in these training opportunities, so to speak?
Well, I think training opportunities at Visa happen every single month, right? I mean, first of all, every day is a training opportunity with our employees. And, we do conduct exercises as well. So part of that is tricking your own employee to click on a link to see who in your organization needs extra training. So these are exercises that we do. We don't tell people when they're going to be performed, just like you don't tell children when you're going to be doing a fire drill, right? You need people to be off their game a little bit to see who will fall victim to it. So we do a lot of exercises to see which employees need additional training and awareness. And again, we do training just as part of general, business as usual. We have to continually learn. We do 12 months of learning at Visa and make sure that everyone knows what resources are available to them to make sure that their defenses are up.
I take it these kind of tests are more about empowering employees rather than kind of testing what their click-through rate is on phishing emails or stuff like that.
Yeah, it's all about awareness, right? It's all about, do you know what one of these looks like? So I go back to the whole point about the human eye might not be able to pick it up. But if you look at the email and you see all the sloppiness, so a good red flag is sloppiness. So is the email written properly? Is the time zone, the date format appropriate for the country that you're in? Is it asking you to do something completely off process? No one is going to get an email from the CEO saying, wire them money, right? So it's kind of this oddity that you're trying to test people's ability to identify what would be not proper email. It should be sent to the team for investigation versus what is a proper email that you can think through. So we put the red flags in there to train on red flags, right? And some of them are harder to pick up than others, but that's the purpose of the exercise, is red flag awareness.
So in terms of your perspective, what do those red flags look like? Is it spelling mistakes? Is it links to unusual sites? What kind of things would you be looking for just in your own inbox or in any other exercise like that?
So the number one red flag, both in business and your personal life, is a sense of urgency. Anyone that's trying to get you to take an action and take that action fast, that's your first red flag, right? Bad actors operate under timelines. They want to get maximum impact for not a lot of time. So do this by tomorrow. Send this immediately. When can I expect to get this? Is something that we tell people. Be aware of sense of urgency, demanding, anxious, and scary tones as well. You mentioned the sloppiness, the spelling mistakes. Those are always really good flags. And, you do see that in your personal life with your text messages, et cetera. Be aware of people trying to gain your trust by saying, I am so-and-so. They try to add personal touches because it's all about trying to get people to let their guard down. So if someone is reaching out to you saying, I am so-and-so from this company and I need you to do something, that's also a bit of a red flag. Could be legitimate, but it's a red flag because criminals have realized that the more trusting they can make themselves seem, the better. And then again, oddness. Is it your normal process? Should someone be asking you to wire them money? There are certain jurisdictions in the world that are known for, probably not having that great of control. So if someone's asking you to update their bank account from one jurisdiction to another that's not known to have good control environment, is that a red flag too? So we do train on a number of red flags, and a lot of these red flags are widely shared on government websites around the world as well to protect their citizens.
So I suppose, in addition to the kind of security awareness training kind of approach, how does Visa use AI to kind of identify and prevent these kind of security incidents from taking place in the first place?
So AI is absolutely woven into the fabric of Visa. Technology is absolutely table stakes when it comes to global money movement. If you think about 700 million transactions a day and just the sheer magnitude of what goes on in the world, human eyes can't look at that all day long. So you have to deploy technology and humans to be your lines of defense, thinking through exactly what's going on in the world. And I think by use of really amazing and powerful tools that do AI, machine learning, deep learning, neural networks, you're actually training the models to think through what is an anomaly. What's that anomalous behavior? And again, like I mentioned before, the technology is very powerful. That's why you have the bad actors going after the humans. But Visa has 60 services and 60 capabilities alone that leverage AI, and just one in particular helped to get rid of $26 billion in fraud, in 2021. So these are very powerful. They're much needed. Companies need to invest the time in the technology and cutting edge tools because, again, it's just the world's interconnected, it's global, it's always on, it's complex. And so you do need to leverage technology in addition to humans.
And these type of AI-driven solutions, they're cost efficient as well, aren't they?
Yeah, well, I think in general, if you think about the amount of people you would need to monitor 700 million transactions a day with their eyeballs versus deploying technology, I think you have to look at it that way, that it's more effective. It's absolutely more effective in preventing fraud and identifying anomalous behavior.
So in terms of security priorities for the next year or so, what should CISOs be looking to invest in? What kind of approach should they be considering to apply in their kind of environments?
So I think with anything like cybersecurity, fraud, these really top risks across the world, you need multiple layers of defense. You need a multi-layered approach. It's not going to be a one size fits all. And I think that starts with investing in the technology, having cutting edge data centers, having tooling, using artificial intelligence to detect anomalies 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You need to have that. You also need to hire the best and brightest folks that are not only thinking about the threats today, but the emerging threat landscape and the threats of the future. Because again, the environment is quite fluid and dynamic. And you have to have big thinkers within your cybersecurity organization, within your risk management function, that are thinking about that evolving landscape to be able to protect you in future years to come. And then in addition, you need relationships. So having a broad network of relationships across the industry, law enforcement, governments, you need to make sure that that information is flowing so that if you identify a threat, you can share that information and triangulate and understand, how the ecosystem is protecting the ecosystem, right? It's not about the power of one, it's about the multiplier effect. So I think between investing in the technology, having the greatest people on the bus to help you navigate, the today and the future, and then also having relationships, that really is a really good way to protect your company.
I suppose when we talk about investing in technology, how can you kind of reconcile the kind of security sprawl of tools and stuff like that with the kind of, whilst maintaining a positive kind of employee experience? Because you notice a lot of security teams are managing like 20 tools or above in kind of best case scenario. How can you make that manageable as well?
Yeah, look, it's a balance because I think, there is going to be friction when you put security in place. If you just think about, traveling at the airport, a long time ago, you could just show up at the airport and it was quite enjoyable experience. Now we have a lot of lines to make sure that, we're protecting the skies. And so, yes, there's a bit of friction that you need to put. And there's technology also that's used at the airport to make sure that you don't just have humans looking. So, yes, there's friction. However, we pay an awful lot of attention to that balance of we do need to put controls in place, but how do we put controls in place that don't feel too onerous, but yet it needs to be effective, right? So I think you're going to see that balance. And one of the things with the fraud tools is not only are you decreasing fraud, as an example, but you're also increasing the chance of my good transactions being approved. So the goal is to make sure that when you are trying to make a transaction, me, Doria Ferrante, the good transactions get approved and the bad transactions don't. That's the goal. And if there's a little bit of friction in between to validate that that's really me, if I'm doing something that I've never done before, we hope that consumers would understand that is to their benefit to protecting them.
I mean, in terms of kind of a security talent perspective internally, what kind of traits do you look for in terms of your security team, in terms of experience and traits?
So I would say one of the most amazing skills you can hire for is big thinkers. People that know how to agilely think about the environment as it evolves. because you can't hire for today. You have to hire for today and tomorrow and all the emerging threats. And you have to continually uplift your environment to be able to stay safe. So we hire big thinkers. We hire people that think systems wise, that think about zero trust architecture. They're always thinking about, you don't trust anymore. You have to verify then trust. And therefore, what would we do to our infrastructure to protect both our house, and then how do you protect the ecosystem, and how do you protect consumers? So I would say big thinking, folks that know how to be very innovative and creative, and are also staying ahead of the environment. So we pay a lot of attention to the environment as it evolves. Again, through our industry relationships and the people that we talk to all day, we try to make sure that we understand where the environment is going and how we'll protect ourselves, our consumers, our clients, and the broader ecosystem through all that effort.
I noticed you touched a bit on zero trust. Why is this such a critical kind of component to build and ensure is kind of in place to secure information in enterprise environments?
I mean, because I would say that I think a long time ago it was you just needed a firewall. There's many people that just think you build a fence and behind the fence everything is fine. Well, that's not true, because bad actors are incredibly sophisticated. And if they can find some kind of a door to get through, you have to make it incredibly difficult. So I always use the analogy with folks who are less familiar with this space that you can lock the door to your house, but then within your house, how do you lock other doors and the cabinets and the drawers and the safes? And you just make it very challenging for folks that you give them a new obstacle at every door they might open. That's the goal. It goes back to this multiple layers, multiple lines of defense to make it a little bit more difficult to find the prize that you're searching for. And because again, bad actors are unfortunately very sophisticated. They thrive in a world of complexity. And in some cases, they're very well funded that, they will try again to permeate whatever different doors you put up in front of them. So it's really important to secure multiple different ways for information to flow, for activities, for folks to get in.
And this is the case kind of in remote working environments as well in particular. It's very difficult to kind of make sure that you're keeping that kind of gateway between sensitive information and kind of unauthorized users.
Yeah, it goes back to, every employee you have is a way to get in to a company, right? So, we all are subject to human vulnerabilities. We multitask. Maybe we're very busy thinking about the holidays and we accidentally click on something that we get. It all comes down to that. So we need to make sure that every employee in the company, all the people in your life, all of your loved ones understand that this risk is present. It will only grow over time, especially as we're in a digital, always on interconnected world.
I mean, in terms of like developments in the industry, do you see the development of passwordless authentication changing the game in terms of social engineering? Will social engineering become less of a technique used by cyber criminals, or do you think they will find new ways to kind of work around these kind of technologies?
I think as long as people are falling victim to them, they will always be around. So the threats that allow criminals to be successful and the chances that people get to take an action on behalf of them is a win for them. And if they're winning, they'll keep doing it. So again, if we can educate the people in our lives to make that more painful, they'll go on to the next threat, which we then, of course, need to train and educate. But, if you think about, it used to be all about mail fraud. Mail fraud is not that successful anymore compared to the internet fraud, right? We're spending a lot more time on the internet versus answering the letters in our mailbox. So you have to pay attention to the evolving threat landscape. And again, it all comes down to if they're winning and they're succeeding, they'll keep doing it.
Yeah, I'd also ask as well, is the recession kind of a concern for you in terms of the threat landscape? Do you think that will aggravate kind of actions of threat actors and kind of make things a little difficult for security teams at the same time?
Yeah, I think between recession and geopolitical uncertainty, I think there's a lot of risk drivers that are present. And you do see that in times of stress, either economic stress, geopolitical uncertainty stress, you tend to see that crime tactics and bad actors could get more aggressive. We saw that during the pandemic. I mean, during the pandemic, think of all the COVID scams that happened and people that thought that they were buying life-saving medicine or donating to a really good cause. It was just a scam. So we have to pay attention to the risk drivers and some of those, the overarching landscape to really see where that heat is going to be. But yeah, absolutely. Times of stress, you see bad actors out hunting. That's absolutely what you see.
Is there a way that kind of the organizations can kind of build the kind of cyber resilience in these kind of scenarios?
Well, I think every organization needs to be building their cyber resilience every day. This is here to stay. It is a top risk for the world. It is a top risk for every industry. So having best-in-class cyber defenses is table stakes, period. And it needs to be treated very seriously. So I don't think it's, 1 year makes it more important. It is always very important. Safety and security is paramount to everything that we do at Visa.
Would you say that cybersecurity isn't just about protecting organizations, but it's also about enabling business success as well? Is that something that you kind of stand behind as well?
Yeah, I think what it allows is both the protection of value and the enablement of value. Really, you want the companies to be growing. You want society to grow. You want people to thrive. You want people around the world to have access to the things that they need. And that requires businesses to be up and running and available to the consumers who need them. Having a cybersecurity attack is going to bring a company down and they're not going to be available to people. So it all comes down to, why are we protecting assets? Why are we protecting the house? Why are we protecting the ecosystem? It's so that businesses and people can thrive, and making sure that you're both protecting value and enabling that value at the same time.
And what would you say to organizations that are kind of looking at AI to kind of enhance their security posture, but aren't really sure how to get it at a higher level? What's the kind of the entry steps to kind of optimize strategy that they can take?
Well, I would say any business that hasn't invested the time to think through the ways that they can leverage technology to do, the work that the humans maybe historically have only done. Thinking through, what is that information? What are those decisions that need to be made? What are those indicators of compromise? What are those indicators of anomalies going on? You need to be thinking about, how do you get the robots? How do you get the systems to pick up what a human used to be able to pick up on a much larger scale? So automation and technology are your friend because they're a lot more clever than the human eye. And it's a lot more scaled than the human eye and that the humans can do. I don't think it's one or the other. I do think that you have to have technology, you have to have best-in-class teams because they complement each other. And there's something that companies should be investing in equally and making sure that they have an offering to the world of tech, people, protection, enablement, value.
So automation is fundamentally about empowering security teams rather than perhaps taking all of the work away from human users.
Yeah, we call it an enabler. It's a strategic enabler. It's an accelerator, right? We use technology so that we can think about other things, right? We're continually thinking through problem solving. If you can leverage the technology as an accelerator and a strategic enabler, that's exactly how companies should be thinking about that.
So if we consider kind of how Visa uses this advanced anomaly detection kind of technology, how does this differ from kind of off-the-shelf solutions that use that kind of AI threat prevention technology?
Well, it comes down to, what are you trying to do with it? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? And if companies can figure out how to solve the problem internally versus an off-the-shelf solution, then that's the best approach for them. if there's an off-the-shelf solution that helps augment or inform some of the decisions that you're trying to make, that also should be on the table. So it just comes down to what business challenge are you trying to solve? What problem are you trying to solve? And what are the options to be able to do that? And so I think you should have an open mind when it comes to problem solving and the tools and the solutions and the inputs that you need to make the better decision.
I think that's a good note to end on, really. Thanks for agreeing to speak to us today. I think we got some really great content out of our conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Huge thanks to Doria and Tim for such an awesome conversation. Next, I hope you will all join us for the live speaker Q&A roundtable session. You can access that by clicking on the pop-up. And that's a wrap. That's it. That was our very first Intelligent Security Summit. Thanks to all of you for attending, because of course we couldn't do it without you. And of course we couldn't do it without our sponsors. Huge thanks to SolarWind and Abnormal Security for supporting this event. And if you missed any of today's sessions, they'll be available on demand. We look forward to seeing you again at Transform 2023 in San Francisco. But until then, my name's been Stuart Rogers. You've been amazing. Thank you all. Until next time.
At SolarWinds, we developed our Secure by Design initiative to be the gold-plated standard for cybersecurity. Secure by Design means developing security into our products and our development lifecycle. It's headlined by our next-generation build system, a new way to develop secure software. This is about becoming a leader in enterprise software security. At SolarWinds, we developed our Secure by Design initiative to be the gold-plated standard for cybersecurity. Secure by Design means developing security into our products and our development lifecycle. It's headlined by our next-generation build system, a new way to develop secure software. This is about becoming a leader in enterprise software security. At SolarWinds, we developed our Secure by Design initiative to be the gold-plated standard for cybersecurity. Secure by Design means developing security into our products and our development lifecycle. It's headlined by our next-generation build system, a new way to develop secure software. This is about becoming a leader in enterprise software security.